The narrative opens with someone expressing they never expected it would take 17 years to come back to Korea. Two containers displayed names, Hoo Jong-yu and Soo-hyuk Jin. Gazing at the urns, a man mentions it's been a long time since he last saw his father and mother. In his reflections, he acknowledges there was a time he questioned how valuable a human life really was. 17 years prior, at 10:32 p.m. in the Gulf of Aden, a cruise liner starts to sink. The boy was incredibly frantic as he searched for his parents. The storm intensified by the moment. The child continued to yell, looking for his family. He attempted to swim against the fierce sea currents. At that instant, the boy spots two bodies drifting. Approaching closer, Dong-woo realizes it's his mother. Examining the body more closely, the boy observes there are several wounds scattered across it. Frozen in shock, he's left immobilized, unsure of how to act in that moment. Nevertheless, the child persists in trying to awaken her. However, a massive wave approaches them, causing the protagonist to begin drowning. In despair, the boy understands he must reach the surface before he exhausts his air. Opening his eyes, he sees numerous bodies strewn beneath the vessel, becoming increasingly horrified by the entire scene. Realizing even his secretary had been murdered, along with the head chef, the captain, and the ship's bodyguard. Suddenly, he spots a body nearby and realizes something dreadful. After all, sinking deeper before him were both his father and mother. But all at once, someone hauls him up. An elderly man inquires if Ta is all right. Noticing the boy is still alive, the man asks if he is able to move. Tears streaming down, he's filled with joy to see his grandfather is still present. Suko states it seems the heavens haven't entirely forsaken them. The protagonist informs him that his parents are beneath them, yet his grandfather acknowledges this, but says there's nothing they can do. He urges his grandson to never forget the words he's about to share, stating that regardless of what happens, the boy must inherit the Jinhu group. With that, the old man gives Tae a pen and tells him that by taking it to lawyer Kim, the man will instinctively know how to assist him. He also must remember not to trust anyone and hurry back to Korea to meet the lawyer. Still, the protagonist pleads with his grandfather to at least rescue his father and mother. The man starts to take off his life vest. The boy is puzzled about what he plans to do with it. Unexpectedly, the old man puts the vest on the child, explaining that they had already been shot prior to the ship even sinking. Inflating the vest, Suko instructs Taha to go and survive at any cost. Thus, the man pushes his grandson away just as another enormous wave approaches them. A storm made lightning flash through the clouds relentlessly. After a while, all the chaos morphed into an agonizingly tranquil silence. The boy was still drifting on the water, opening his eyes clearly fatigued. The boy is left speechless when he notices something casting a shadow against the bright sky. The origin was a massive cargo ship traversing the area. Someone smiles as their face is obscured by the light. Taha felt very frightened and bewildered after being rescued. Two guards with rifles were astonished to see the child still alive. One of them starts shouting for his superior, announcing that the boy is all right. Hearing a language not his own, the protagonist realizes they're speaking Italian. The man continued to attempt to communicate with his superior. Someone appears to make a call. While one of them complains about their boss being present again, the portly one inquires if the child can comprehend him. However, Taha notices a tattoo prominently displayed on the man's neck. With that, the protagonist realizes that based on the tattoo and the firearms, these individuals are not typical. Suddenly, the group's leader leaps down from her location. Startling him, the woman lands in front of the boy, questioning how he ended up aboard her vessel. Her subordinate cautions that the child might not understand her language. Irritated, she instructs someone to fetch a translator to facilitate their communication. Taha simply observes them, feeling a bit anxious, unsure of how to respond. But to the woman's astonishment, he speaks in Italian, stating he was on a yacht that was attacked nearby. With that, she asks where this remarkable child originates from. He clarifies that he's Korean and that during a storm his family's boat was stormed by armed men who murdered his parents and grandfather. The boss states that apparently, after being shipwrecked, he ended up on the Salerno family's vessel. Confused, the boy wonders what the Salerno family is. She begins laughing at the absurdity as an Asian child speaking Italian claims to have come from the Gulf of Aden in the Middle East. Drawing a knife, the woman remarks that it's disgraceful, but she can't believe it. Pointing the blade at the boy, Regina asks if there's any reason she shouldn't simply toss him back into the ocean. The boy is unsure what to say to prevent that. Anxious, he tries to come up with something as quickly as possible. So Tenga shows the pen given to him by his grandfather, explaining that he is the grandson of Suko, president of the Chingu group, and the son of Suyak, Suko's third son. And because of that, rather than throwing him overboard, they could assist him in reaching out to his people and gain some advantages. Irritated, Regina asks if he is genuinely referring to the Chingu group. She realizes that this is the most successful conglomerate in South Korea, and evidently that brat is part of the family. As a result, the leader commands her subordinates to look up the news related to Korea. While both of them search for something pertinent to what the boy mentioned, the woman asks if the child speaks any other languages. He informs them that he speaks Cantonese, English, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi, and Esperanto, claiming to be fluent enough for basic dialogues. One of the men mentions he found some news from Korea. Regina smiles, realizing that this is intriguing. She states that if the boy wishes to reach out to someone in Korea, he can ask them. But the boy recalls what his grandfather had told him, instructing him to seek lawyer since the man would know how to assist him. The protagonist declares that he needs her to connect him with someone outside of his family, in Seoul, at 01:12 a.m. Someone answers the phone, asking who it is. The individual states they're calling from overseas, informing that they will only converse in English, asking if he is lawyer Kim. Regina mentions that from the photograph she sent, the lawyer must have realized she has the valuable grandson of the group with her. Asking if she should send him back to Korea, however, the old man questions what she means by that. She proposes an offer of $10,000, suggesting they should meet at the Panama Canal for the exchange. However, the guy asserts he's too busy to negotiate, thus making a counteroffer of 9,000. Placing his drink down on the table, he picks up a nearby microphone, cursing and stating there'll be $1 million. While dancing with some individuals, the man claims he'll pay $1 million if she eliminates Tatuti, commanding the woman to kill the boy and send her video proof within the next 5 minutes, so she'll receive the million as a reward. Reginald inquires what would happen if he didn't send her the money after the act. While everyone observes, the lawyer assures her that he only needs to tap his phone 3 times to send such a small sum. Besides that, if she fails to do it, Kim warns he will expose to the press that they were responsible for the attacks. Ending the call, he informs his superior that there's no need to be concerned as he's contacted some mercenaries nearby. Thanks to that, the Che and Gu group now fully belongs to them. The boy remained paralyzed by everything he had just heard. After all, that man desires him dead within the next 5 minutes, making him increasingly terrified. The woman states that evidently that's just how affairs operate. Because of that, her motive for sparing him is eliminated. Frightened, Taya begins pleading with them not to take his life, but Regina asserts that he's no longer part of the affluent family. Moreover, they're likely already organizing his funeral, asking if the boy understands what that entails. Stating that this is rather typical in her realm, individuals eliminate others to acquire their possessions and accomplishments. Appalled, he questions why his uncles and relatives are scheming to eliminate his whole family. Both guards converse among themselves, saying that their boss won't execute him, even though she's enjoying taunting him. Shaking, he cannot comprehend how he survived the sea only to perish at the hands of strangers. Pondering what Chimhu genuinely signifies, and whether it was worth murdering his parents and grandfather for their positions. Suddenly, someone bursts into the room declaring they're under siege. The individual informs them that 3 patrol boats and a heavily armed military chopper have surfaced. She inquires if it's Interpol, but the man replies no and clarifies that they're disregarding all radio communications. Regina is confused about what's happening. After all, it would have to be someone deranged to execute such a thing. Gazing at the child, she finally comprehends the instigator. Realizing that those Koreans must have reached out to these individuals to locate that boy, out of nowhere, Taega stabs his right hand with a pen. No one grasps what the child is attempting to achieve. He asserts that the Chingu group will never provide her with the funds. Additionally, the woman stands to gain nothing from eliminating him. The Salerno family's trade leader is taken aback by the boy's logic. The protagonist pleads to join them, insisting he will remain faithful for the rest of his life if they assist him in seeking vengeance. The woman wonders how he became aware of the Salerno emblem. The deranged woman begins laughing uncontrollably. Enthusiastic, Reginald instructs Mateo to prepare because the spectacle must commence. Before departing, she questions if the boy understands the significance of his statements, asking if he genuinely desires the power of retribution, even if it involves blood on his hands. Remembering that his grandfather had said that regardless of the means, he must inherit Xiangu at all costs. Determined, the protagonist merely nods in agreement. Smiling, she remarks that barking rarely bites, but still, this was rather intriguing. The deranged woman kicks the door open, instructing them to follow her, stating that from that moment forward, the boy's life belongs to the Salerno family, so he will live and die for them. Therefore, he must pay close attention because that is his destiny. Teda truly observes, frozen by what he witnesses. With that, 17 years go by and he finally returns to Korea. The boy asks his father and mother to safeguard him as he seeks revenge. However, he seems taken aback by something, quickly turning to glance behind him. He leaps to the side as several shots impact the vicinity. Numerous soldiers had arrived and unleashed many rounds at Taha. Exiting some vehicles, someone questions if those pests can't even aim. A Chianhu group security guard and manager instructs them to search for the senior administrative director, stating that he doesn't know the man, but he must be insane to believe he could abduct a Jinhu director. One of his subordinates informs the manager that they located the vehicle they were searching for. He advises everyone to be cautious when opening the trunk since the director is still alive. While commanding them to assess his injuries, a massive explosion occurs. The guy gets furious at the audacity of placing a bomb there. But suddenly, half of his men have their heads severed. When he finally turns around, the others are also eliminated. Remarkably fast, Taha had vanquished them all in a moment. The man observes a slight gash on his side. Anxiously, he realizes it was due to the protective gear. Attempting to strike the protagonist, the bald man insults him as a tiny insect. Nevertheless, the boy retorts that he shouldn't assume he's the only one with a voice. Swiftly, he delivers another blow to the back of his adversary, launching an attack that cleaves him in two. As he falls, Jong ponders what just occurred. Unable to comprehend how that man achieved such a feat, he grumbles about who that fiend truly is. On the contrary, the protagonist appeared unfazed by it. He begins to wipe his daggers as he strides away, moving towards a luxury vehicle and retrieving a bag from the back seat. He then proceeds to the trunk. Gasping, the director pleads with Taya to release him, insisting he was merely obeying orders. This was the ex-lawyer Kim, the one who had commanded his demise, arguing that he had no motive to eliminate the chairman. However, the boy opens the bag and tosses several bills atop the man, declaring that this is the 1,000,000. After all, that cash probably was never handed over to him. Terrified, the man inquires what money Taha is referring to. However, the director recalls that day. The protagonist retrieves a lighter from his jacket, asserting that it was because he perished that day. As he tosses the lighter, he states he was reborn. With that, Kim starts to burn alive. Indifferently, Tae-hai simply observes with detachment. Following that, he calmly picks something up. Placing the cigar in his mouth, the protagonist mentally tries to communicate with his parents and grandfather, apologizing for taking so long, begging them not to fret and to find tranquility, saying that from that day forward he will bear all their suffering. After a while in the city, a contemporary building stood out among the rest. The protagonist was moving swiftly, resolved to accomplish something. Some men questioned where he believed he was headed as they prepared to fire to stop him. Nonetheless, the lunatic swiftly dispatched both of them. Still, Taiha didn't seem disturbed by the obstacle. He continued walking calmly through the corridor. Observing the situation, a man sat on the ground, horrified by the spectacle. Terrified, he asked the protagonist who had sent him there. The man stated they were part of the Chungu group, claiming he wouldn't be safe after all that. While cleaning his blade, Tae-in mentioned that this was Holdings, a private security firm contracted by Chungu. Its primary role was protecting directors and board members outside office hours throughout the Gangmuk region. During their downtime, they tracked journalists or individuals who reported on Chingu. They abducted, assaulted, and even murdered them. In other words, they were hired assassins. The individuals who had been captured were utterly devastated and hopeless. The protagonist simply hurled one of his daggers at the old man. Afterward, he instructed everyone to use it to free themselves and to ensure they never encountered him again, so the bindings were severed. The three remained bewildered by everything that had transpired. The old man stood up and returned the knife to the boy. Running away, they expressed their gratitude as they departed. Meanwhile, the company member commanded everyone to regroup. One of the fugitives glanced back as he heard the man grumbling. The overweight man inquired who he was, speculating if Taha was part of their clan. Removing his mask, the boy replied that no one had clarified, that he simply wanted to have a somewhat more private discussion, stating that he required the schedule of all individuals on the board from the directors to the president. The man claimed he didn't know, and even if he did, he wouldn't disclose it. His family and himself would be dead if he spoke up. The protagonist remarked that it appeared he valued his existence, indicating that he'd begin with his eye, and that when he felt prepared, he should raise his hand. Inside a building, a large screen outside showcased news about a celebrity. Meanwhile, several individuals sat on the steps experiencing homelessness. Due to the heat, even a cicada lay lifeless on the pavement. Breaking the stillness of the area, someone seemed to be in haste. As he walked, Taeyun noticed that his cigar would attract too much attention, pondering whether he should try Korean cigarettes. The street was extremely busy at that hour. He said he had finally returned to Korea and that thus far, everything appeared normal. However, he observed his country was going insane, with numerous ads for loans and insurance being aired everywhere. A politician was delivering a speech, asserting he would utilize his authority and influence to eliminate the epidemic of crime and violence, proclaiming that from that day forward, his war against crime would be publicly announced. However, his oration was interrupted by someone aiming a gun at him. It was reported that in 1990, the president was assassinated during his campaign against organized crime. Since then, no one had stood against criminal organizations, transforming the country into a place engulfed by violence and money. The boy strolled through the streets lost in thought. Consequently, the Chung Hu group aligned with criminal enterprises to bribe the media and suppress rivals. They invested in entertainment and sports, causing the populace to lose interest in politics to the extent that even a dog could become a candidate. Even so, people continued to assert that the Chung Hu group was a company that benefited the populace. Taya entered a shop calmly. The clerk greeted him. Both he and another guy requested a pack of this. They stared at each other for a moment, unable to comprehend how such a coincidence could occur. A bit irritated, the protagonist decided to change his order. However, they both had the same idea and requested a plus simultaneously. Once again, they regarded each other with suspicion. Awkwardly, the woman mentioned that, regrettably, they only had one pack remaining. Tana sighed deeply, clearly irritated by the situation. As he exited, he requested the clerk to give the pack to the other man, saying he'd manage without it. The man continued to stare as the boy walked away. After the man completed his purchase, he encountered the protagonist outside, who politely requested a cigarette. However, he asked if the boy couldn't visit another convenience store. But Taiva clarified that it had been a long while since he was last in Korea, so he wanted to try it quickly. The guy gave up on avoiding him. As he handed over a cigarette, he remarked that he couldn't believe anyone wanted to try that flavorless thing. As they walked, the man stated he'd receive a fine if he smoked there, so he suggested waiting until reaching a smoking area. Watching him, Taya admitted that after being in the mafia for about 17 years, a simple glance is sufficient to evaluate a person. Assuming that guy was strong, just as strong as the ones he faced abroad, he wondered if individuals like that were prevalent in Korea. Also departing, the protagonist expressed he hoped not to encounter him again. After some time, that same man arrived at the spot where the protagonist had carried out the massacre. While smoking, he calmly observed one of the bodies. Kneeling down, the guy examined the corpses more closely. Noticing they were all mortally injured by stab wounds from a blade akin in length to a sashimi knife. Extinguishing his cigarette in the pool of blood, he retrieved his phone and called his employer. His boss reminded him he had previously stated not to call at that hour. The man inquired if he had a meeting later. He suggested that the best option would be to cancel the appointment. After all, the assassin who took out Director Kim might be after him. The man sipping his wine calmly questioned what was happening. His subordinate explained that he had visited the security firm and found them deceased. From the wounds, it appeared to be a solo attack. Besides the assassin not being ordinary, it was highly probable he knew precisely where the meeting would take place. But his boss remarked that an emergency family meeting was a custom in the Chingu group, asking if his subordinate truly believed someone would invade a gathering known only to family members. He stated he sent him so he could track that man discreetly. Lawson thought the man realized the injuries from that knife reminded him of something, recalling the protagonist asking for a cigarette from his hands as he took it, asserting that if he doesn't use knives, there's no way he could have acquired all those scars on his palms. With that in mind, Hoon Min asks his boss if there's anyone in his family who's skilled with knives. Chuckling, the man replies those people can barely slice an apple. Moreover, everyone is present except for the children, so he offers another 100,000 for Hoon Min to secure the area and guarantee its safety. Exiting the office, Hooman states he'll attend the meeting. Still, he requests for the security to be bolstered. Annoying his boss, he simply asserts he understands. Passing his phone to another employee, a man mutters that lunatic is just a thug and still thinks he can issue commands. As he strides down the corridor, he straightens himself and prepares for the meeting. Upon reaching the meeting, he greets his boss and asks when the president arrived. Speaking on the phone, Huiman updates the leader of his gang that he plans to assist the Qianhu group for one more day before returning. However, he's labeled a traitor. Instead of becoming furious, he asks if his boss has been drinking. He clarifies that they offered him another 100,000 for the task, asserting that only a fool would refuse it. Furthermore, there seems to be a perilous assassin on the loose, yet he notices the protagonist lurking in the alley. Quickly, Huiman includes the call and states he'll explain the details later, glancing toward the boy. Affecting nonchalance, he asks if one cigarette wasn't sufficient. Taiyun asserts that discovering someone of his caliber near the scene of the incident isn't a coincidence, claiming it was wise to follow him. Smiling, the man remarks it's been quite a day. First, someone borrows his cigarette, then follows him around. He confesses he can't believe he didn't spot him, saying it's the first time something like that has occurred. Approaching him, the protagonist states that before they begin, he'd like to pose one question. He asks whether the man is collaborating with the Chi and Gu group. On the other hand, Huiman questions if he wasn't paying attention to the conversation, stating he's merely assisting them temporarily. At that, the boy gives him a deadly glare. He draws the two daggers from his back, and then instantly clashes his blade against the opponent's weapon. They exchange looks, assessing each other's skill, thus begins a frantic exchange of strikes. However, Huiman leaps into the air, rising above the protagonist. He swings his weapon to strike. To his surprise, his bat is cut into pieces. Observing that, the gangster wonders when that even occurred. Moreover, Tae had disappeared in the blink of an eye. Then his adversary becomes uneasy as he realizes something. The roles had reversed, and now the one airborne was the protagonist, who swiftly readies to conclude the fight. Feeling a twinge of dread, Human concedes that Chi and Gu have landed themselves in significant trouble this time, questioning how they became targets of such a monster. Taya plunges toward his foe, brandishing his blades. The gangster is at a loss for what to do without a weapon. The protagonist delivers a strike, sending the man crashing to the ground, already preparing to depart. While cleaning the excess blood from his knife, he makes his way to the alley's exit, leaving Human's body lying there. However, to his astonishment, the man inquires if the boy is serious. Even injured, he was still alive. He asks if after all that, the protagonist is truly just going to walk away, asserting that he'll regret letting him survive. Sheathing his dagger, Taeha clarifies that he has his own code, warning that if he were with the Kinhu group, he'd already be finished, that the man should keep out of his path. Otherwise, the next time he hears is about assisting his foes, he won't be so lenient. Furthermore, if he can't accept that he was spared, he can just view it as reparation for the cigarette. Still on the ground, Huiman grins as he realizes that a simple cigarette saved his life, admitting that this time it was quite inexpensive. A short while later, a car races down the street. Clearly the protagonist was behind the wheel. For some reason, he appeared both annoyed and in pain. Noticing a wound around his waist, Taeya observes that at least the cut wasn't severe. While driving, he states that he can still move. He presses down on the accelerator. He only requires 32 minutes. He mentions that finally, the revenge he's schemed for 17 years will finally come to pass, with only 32 minutes remaining until its fulfillment. Once again, the boy is engulfed by memories from his childhood. His mother pleads with him not to look, while his father uses his body to protect them both from the bullets. However, extremely frightened and anxious, he rushes toward his father. The man asks what she's doing, telling his wife to grab the boy and flee, so his mother lifts Taha up so they can attempt to escape. But then the ship begins to shake violently. Even the assassins struggle to maintain their balance. His mother places the boy outside the door. She instructs her son to find a life vest and leap into the water. With a smile, Hoo-jung declares he must survive. One of the men expresses annoyance and reminds me stated to detonate the explosives only after eliminating everyone. Glancing in his direction, the protagonist is taken aback. They converse in Korean. The man's face was entirely concealed by a mask and goggles as he aimed at him and his mother. Hoo-jung panics and urges Taya to flee as fast as he can. The boy begins to run wildly through the ship. Frightened, the child was overwhelmed with terror. He runs, gasping while sobbing uncontrollably. Following that earlier explosion, part of the yacht was already ablaze. But then another bomb detonates. As a result, the ship begins to sink even more rapidly. Back to the present in the secret annex in Gangbook. The CDO of the Chingu Group's department store inquires if they truly found the person who murdered director Kim. Nonetheless, Jae-sung mentions it was likely a crime driven by emotion. After all, the director had two secret affairs. His sister remarks that's revolting, but he responds that it's ironic coming from someone with multiple lovers. Jang Won inquires about director Kim's position in the company's share allocation, noting they'll need to make an announcement shortly. But abruptly, someone slams their hand on the table, drawing everyone's focus. The man instructs everyone to hush. Guho instructs his son to provide details. Cheong states that 2 employees were located at the scene, but they had little information and were sent away. Moreover, it was verified that there were no additional witnesses. The man states they were merely subcontractors, so they lack substantial knowledge, and the police assured that the incident wouldn't be disclosed. Suddenly, his father throws a glass of wine at his head. Everyone seated at the table is left bewildered by what just occurred. The elderly man questions where the Ojong gang is. Chong appeared visibly annoyed by that. Nevertheless, he smirks, mentions they don't seem to know anything, even dispatching Huimin, their 7th in command. Still, the old man shatters a bottle over his son's head. He asserts that even after 24 hours, he hasn't discovered who the murderer is or where he can be found. Instead, he brings news about a gang. He states that if the former president and Suyak hadn't perished 17 years ago, someone as inept as him would never have set foot there. Along with the wine, the man's face was now entirely smeared with blood. Regardless of what transpired, Chum guarantees that he'll locate him within the next 12 hours. The rest of the family observes that neither of them has changed, and it disturbs them all. Juvia questions why he's so harsh with the eldest, after all he is still his firstborn. However, her brother asserts it's not due to animosity, affirming that it's certainly rooted in fear. Grabbing a cloth, Cheong promptly asks his subordinate for his phone. While cleaning his face, he searches for something on his device. He inquires about the location of his men. His assistant replies they're already prepared. The guy expresses excitement, stating he's eager to see how grand this entrance will be. On a highway at night, the protagonist was making his way toward his objective. Taha confesses he's always kept a watchful eye on the Chanhu group. 17 years ago, the day he was accepted into the Salerno family. Even prior to his grandfather's funeral, Guo assumed the role of due chairman, acquiring all the shares and seizing the position. He exploited the disorder from the failed war on crime and formed alliances with factions like the Ojong gang to amplify his power. While that marked the onset of the Chanwu era, they still convene with official members during such occasions. This had been an age-old family practice since the time when his grandfather was alive. Neither the system nor the customs had altered. Everyone had killed to ascend in the hierarchy established by Suko, willing to even take the lives of their own parents and him. One of the guards was monitoring the cameras, questioning whose vehicle was approaching. He asked his superior if the members were anticipating any visitors, but this was denied. He reports that a car is heading toward the front gates. Additionally, it doesn't appear to be slowing down. Recognizing that it's likely some maniac, the head of security commands the barriers to be elevated. Consequently, some containment stakes begin to rise from the ground. However, the protagonist speeds up even further. After all, he doesn't require tricks up his sleeve to take down individuals who have been shielded their entire lives. Removing his belt, Taya states there's no use in crafting elaborate schemes. The front end of his car is utterly wrecked from the collision. Nevertheless, he jumps out with his weapon drawn. He expresses that the only thing he wishes is that they haven't forgotten about his family, so he can confront them directly. The security personnel gaze at the intruder in terror. The boy swiftly dispatches all of them in a single strike, proclaiming that he's back. Confused, they inquire what that loud sound was. They wonder why it keeps growing louder. Moreover, it appears to be emanating from the front gate. Unlike the others, Chum appeared perplexed yet assured. His uncle instructs the guy to head over there and find out what all the fuss is about. However, surprising John 1, he declares there's no necessity. All the guards within the hall aim their weapons at the family members. The eldest sister asks what's happening. Guho, annoyed, questions if they're really trying to fool around at a time like this. Nevertheless, his son calmly rises while wiping his mouth. The old man asks if he's truly going to follow through with it. Smiling, Chung asserts that his father always anticipated this would occur eventually. That was the reason his father was often angry with him, as he feared he'd end up like his grandfather. With a menacing expression, the madman states that ultimately, the one who murdered his grandfather and uncle was him. Meanwhile, the protagonist walks through the gates proclaiming that his revenge is finally about to commence. The guards aim their weapons, questioning if this is some sort of ambush. Jae-sung asks if his nephew's lost his mind. They question what the guy is doing, stating that he should never aim a weapon at his own family. However, Cheong insists that he's not doing anything. Still, they continue cursing him and asserting it's obvious what he's trying to achieve. Looking at one of the guards, Jui asks if he's genuinely going to betray them for that kid. Even though he was her personal bodyguard, young Minapal apologizes, making it clear he's forsaking her. Even the second son's bodyguard claims it's nothing personal, but the rewards for treachery were simply too alluring. On the contrary, one of them remarks that if they had at least received a pay increase, none of this would be occurring. The only one who remains silent is Chiang's own bodyguard. The guy's father expresses that he can comprehend the others betraying them, but he cannot fathom why his own son would do this. He asks if his own guard will truly turn against them. Jaeon-soo just observes without moving or speaking a word. The man states he isn't compensated to protect him personally, but rather the Shingu group. Jeonwon questions if the guards genuinely believe they will gain anything by doing this. He attempts to keep threatening them, but a gun is pressed against his head. His own bodyguard executes him in cold blood. With that, the two remaining brothers become frantic and plead for mercy. However, gunfire reverberates through the hall as blood spills everywhere. John hands the cloth to his subordinate, walking steadily toward his father. The old man concedes he already anticipated something like this would occur someday, since the day his other son succumbed to acute leukemia, and shortly thereafter his wife requested a divorce without asking for a dime. Quaking with furies, he states he always suspected Chang was behind everything, which is why he maintained his distance. Twirling the gun, the man remarks that for someone who orchestrated the deaths of his own father and brother, Guvo speaks too much. Pressing the gun to his head, he demands to know who sent his father and brother out to sea. He questions what else he could have done if he hadn't eliminated everyone. Soo-yok's son would have claimed the presidency, and they wouldn't have made it this far. The madman approaches and asks why his father never named him the future heir. The old man grows increasingly frightened by it all. On top of that, his son was glaring at him with a terrifying expression, while Google asserts that if he had done that, the boy would have killed him even sooner. He doesn't deny that he would have taken him out earlier, but expresses he's a bit bothered to hear it stated aloud. His father reassures him that even if he kills him right there, he will never ascend to the presidency. But Chung interrupts, claiming he already understands that. After all, power transitions through political or violent means are not acknowledged. That's a stipulation made by the committee. For that reason, the man claims it's unfortunate. He clarifies that the individual causing all that commotion outside isn't one of them. The president asks who it could be. As he fires at his father, he explains that it's a young master who waited 17 long years for this moment. The guards were shooting at the intruder. They attempted to encircle him since the assassin was unarmed. The protagonist recalls that the Central Security Unit consists of those who protect the executive members, thus they hold prominent positions. Therefore, he presumes the bodyguards will be much tougher than the previous ones. He halts his run for a brief moment. Altering the direction of his charge, the boy asserts this won't pose a problem. He begins to approach the foes in a zigzag manner to evade the bullets, using one of the guards' bodies as a shield. Desperately, the man pleads with them not to shoot since he'll be hit. But the guards disregard him and open fire, leaving one of the security personnel petrified, his weapons severed in two. In an instant, Taha manages to take them all down swiftly. The leader instructs his men to evacuate the president as quickly as possible. However, the protagonist hurls his dagger at the man. Nevertheless, one guard succeeds in intercepting the blade. A bespectacled man questions why they're causing all that racket, asking if they can't handle this quietly. 3 department heads arrive to try to halt him, but that small group is simply overlooked as the protagonist dispatches the others. One of them claims he can stop him alone and tells his associates to step back. However, even though he's extremely powerful, Taha is struggling with the injury he sustained earlier. With every passing minute, the wound appears to worsen. Shaking off the daze, he realizes his opponent's fist is perilously close to his face. Stowe, his only choice is to block the assault as he's thrown backward. He manages to regain some stability, but unexpectedly a shadow looms over him. The man asks how he dares to attack that place, and worse, gets distracted while invading his territory. However, the protagonist agrees and states it's no time to be sidetracked by wounds, launching a blow straight at the man's chest, startling his companions as they observe the abrupt defeat. Swiftly, Taya throws his remaining dagger at the two who remain. Neither of them appeared as confident as before. Surprisingly, the intruder had already landed a hit on the man who had blocked his ranged attacks. Cholo can barely track him with his eyes. Grabbing one of the knives he had thrown earlier, the protagonist decapitates the last department head. Thanks to that, he had vanquished all the exterior guards. As he approaches the entrance, he notices his second dagger, retrieving it nonchalantly as if no one else were present. Cleaning off the surplus blood, he confesses it took longer than anticipated. Even so, the area feels unnervingly silent. He contemplates whether they escaped via a hidden passage he was unaware of. Uncertain of what lies ahead, the boy starts to move through the house. Finally, reaching the room where everyone was slain and only Chang remains seated among the blood, he greets him. He also praises him for making it that far, asking if he'd like to sit down to catch his breath and rest a moment. Witnessing all this, even the protagonist doesn't fully grasp what's happening, observing Jae-sung's body with a bullet wound in the center of his forehead. The same is true for his aunt Ju-hui. Even John Won had met the same end. The current president was also deceased. Rising, his cousin remarks that he's in better condition than he anticipated, asserting that modern assassins should take better care of themselves. Formally greeting him, Xiaomi asks if he recognizes him. Meanwhile, the protagonist simply states the man's name and mentions that he's Guho's eldest son. Laughing, the lunatic claims he doesn't remember them being so familiar that he would call his father by his first name. Suspicious Tae-Anna merely observes that odd behavior. His cousin explains he stayed there because he thought it would be rude not to greet him, and also because he needs to clarify a few things, informing him that if he doesn't wish to sit, they can remain standing since it won't take long anyway. Shang asks if the boy recalls that day 17 years ago, the day he was rescued by the Italian mafia. Interrupting him, his bodyguard states that the helicopter is prepared, insisting they should depart soon as it's too risky to linger. Frustrated, the man says he had requested her to only call him once he finished speaking. However, Taha is suddenly taken aback by something, clearly indicating he wasn't anticipating that at all, stating he recognizes that voice, the voice of the one who murdered his family 17 years ago. Recalling the man who aimed a rifle at him and his mother, the individual who complained about the early explosions while laughing beneath a mask. Extremely furious, Taha inquires if he was that worm. The lunatic begins to stifle his laughter, asserting there's not much left to say, telling the protagonist to cease speaking to him so casually. After all, it's making him feel like killing him. Charging ahead, he dares the man to attempt it since his goal from the outset was to eradicate the entire family. But his cousin begins saying there's a saying that goes, when in Korea, act like a Korean, telling him to alter his manner of speaking. Irritated, Tae-young starts trying to comprehend what exactly is occurring, realizing that Chiang knows he survived 7 years ago and also knows about him being a Salerno assassin. He wonders why he waited until his return minus 17 years after the incident to make his move. Attempting to capture the boy's attention, the man asks him to genuinely listen, stating he's about to start. Only then does Tae-young realize that the madman doesn't intend to execute a coup. He seeks to blame him for the assault, claiming he allowed it so that he can successfully seize the presidency. Jun-yuk tells the young master that they don't require introductions. The protagonist simply raises his dagger. The bodyguard begins firing at the boy. However, the assassin succeeds in deflecting all of them, using his blade to redirect the course of the projectiles, quickly closing the gap between them. However, another guard delivers a harsh blow to the boy. Even though he anticipated more, he couldn't foresee the strike. Unlike the other, the man presents himself as Young-ho Park. Evading being trapped, the young master swiftly retreats. Stopping in front of his adversaries, wasting no time, Junyev resumes shooting at him, admitting that he's faster than the rumors suggested he could dominate track and field if he turned professional. His partner blocks the protagonist's escape. Even he becomes a bit anxious about the situation. Junho asks if flexibility is the young master's secret to success, quickly launching a frantic barrage of attacks. Tae realizes they are formidable, entirely different from those he battled outside. Nevertheless, if it weren't for that injury, he might even be able to contend with them effortlessly. Observing that Chang seems to have lowered his guard, he understands this might be the sole opportunity before guard Young-soo arrives. Moreover, if the woman next to him is Dae-in, there are 3 guards in the chamber, although there were 4 participants in the meeting. Unexpectedly, his musings are interrupted as Juno gets ready to strike him. Thanks to the reflection in his opponent's eye, Taha recognizes the 4th guard. Yaman was wielding a sword poised to attack him from behind. To their mutual astonishment, he disappears between the two. They can't comprehend how that's even feasible. Kneeling on the ground, the protagonist understands this must be the final one. The guy grumbles about being reflected, blaming Junho, but his companion states that if it were that simple, the boy would already be dead. Reloading his firearms, Junho claims he can hardly fathom the bonus they'll earn if they eliminate that guy. Thus, both he and the guard with glasses employ their weapons to shoot at the assassin. Observing the situation, Chung vocalizes that it's difficult to follow a fight that encompasses both ranged and melee combat, noting that they were trained explicitly to defeat him, as rumors of his superhuman speed circulated through Interpol. Admitting he even contemplated killing him with a bomb, the tale of him perishing in battle would grant him greater notoriety. Junho positions himself in front of the boy, trying to prevent him from fleeing. Junyuk states it doesn't matter how swift he is. It's all finished now that Tae has been trapped. With that, the guard employs his brass knuckles to attempt to land a hit. The protagonist had little recourse, merely watching the blow coming toward him. His cousin thanks him for the entertainment while grinning maliciously. After being hit by the enemy's fist, he crashed against the wall, causing it to fracture entirely. Flashing back to 4 years ago, Reginald was chastising him and asking what on earth it was, saying she instructed him to manage the traitor, not use him as a payment for the walls. Even she began to vomit upon witnessing the scene. Still shouting, the woman claims that with his speed, he could have accomplished it quietly, recalling the day they rescued him. She expresses that she understands his fury, since Lorenzo always treated him kindly, but murdering someone in that manner will only ignite a desire for revenge. Therefore, as his mentor and representative for the Salerno family, Regina urges him never to commit such an act again. However, the protagonist appeared neither happy nor regretful. Still, he states that in this way, people will never forget. Confused, she inquires what Ta is referring to. He clarifies that if they eliminate traitors quietly, their deaths won't serve as warnings. He asserts that everyone needs to understand what awaits them if they betray the family. Rumors must circulate in exaggerated and distorted manners, thereby gradually decreasing the number of traitors, because otherwise it will always be an unending struggle. The woman questions whether he chose the path of violent deaths to avert greater bloodshed. Aside from where he stood, everything surrounding him was stained with blood. She remarks it's absurd for such a notion to emerge from a boy standing in the midst of a river of blood without a single drop on his face. Interrupting her own reflections, Reginald declares that evidently being an assassin truly doesn't suit him. Back to the current moment, Juno freezes as a glimmer appears in the middle of his chest. The guy begins coughing up blood while that glimmer continues to shine. Even Xiang and his bodyguard are taken aback by it. The protagonist had brutally slashed the guy. With a menacing gaze, he confronts his other adversaries. Terrified, the young man quickly points his weapon. However, in an instant, his eye is pierced. After being struck, the man acknowledges to himself that they underestimated this guy. In addition to his speed, he's powerful. Furthermore, those who genuinely witnessed his abilities never survived to describe what they were like. Even while demonstrating all that talent to keep fighting, Teo was increasingly hurt, and his injuries were worsening. Jimyuk was frantic. No one informed him that his strength was this tremendous. However, Jinsu appears and calls out to the woman, urging her to take the master outside, claiming he will follow shortly. Noticing that the boy is astonished, and seeing that his cousin is attempting to flee, he yells the guy's name, slicing through both of Jumeo's weapons and dashing toward the elevator. Xiang leans his head out to check what's occurring. With uncontrollable fury, Taehi demands to know where he thinks he's heading when their confrontation isn't finished yet. However, blocking the doorway was Jinsu, who greets the young master. Tae was taken aback to see that the president's bodyguard had arrived. Still, the boy jumps forward, insisting he move out of his path. But unexpectedly, the man halts both blades with one hand. Preparing to strike him, the older man comments that the boy has grown significantly, admitting he's impressed. With that, the man delivers several strikes all over the protagonist's body. Almost all of Tae's ribs end up broken. Subsequently, Tae starts to cough blood from all the damage. Crushing the blades with his hand, Junsu states that, regrettably, this will be his end. Landing a punch in the same spot, he sends the assassin's body soaring. However, the old man is taken aback to see that his clothes have been torn. Looking at his subordinate, he instructs Jang Hyuk to rise, saying he knows he's okay. Nervously, he admits he believed it was finished for him. The old man warns that the building will detonate soon, telling him to grab his partner and leave. Lying on the ground was the protagonist, who appeared to be lifeless. Upon reaching the rooftop, the president's bodyguard approaches the helicopter. Jang inquires if he completed the task. The man affirms and states he'll blow up the building as soon as they lift off. Jung-soo says he'll handle the preparations for takeoff, but the man tells him to merely keep the door open and get them airborne. Putting on his headset, the bodyguard warns that they'll fly straight into the helicopter, so he recommends closing the door. However, the psychopath insists he needs to see it, claiming he waited too long for this moment. With that, the helicopter begins to rise as Choang stands in front of the door. He calmly watches while smiling, swearing, and saying he always despised that house. As he complains about how bothersome and hypocritical his family was, Dylan and Jonsu exchange glances. Suddenly, the maniac recalls when the protagonist mentioned things weren't over between them. With a smirk, he calls him a poor child. After all, he lived for his vengeance and ultimately faced the same fate. He asks if they knew that the term family derives from the Latin famulus, meaning slave. Holding the detonator in his hands, he urges everyone to witness how he will transform Jinku from now on, entirely obliterating the mansion of those secret meetings. Inside, Taeho was lying on the floor, unconscious. Still dazed, he realizes that the noise is from the helicopter and acknowledges that it's all finished. Changing his mind, he declares that there's still time. Meanwhile, Chiang observes the explosion. Throwing the detonator down, he says they really conclude things with a bang. As the protagonist leaps amid the flames, the lunatic says he's going to lie down a bit since it's so hot, ordering his subordinates to head directly to headquarters. But Taya strikes him with his knife. However, he only manages to strike his calf. His cousin begins wailing in agony. Both guards stand up, startled by the circumstances. Enraged, his cousin labels him an insect and demands to understand what he's doing. The protagonist asks if he truly believed he could evade capture after ruining so many families. Since he's dangling from the knife, his weight causes it to rip Chiang's leg even further. As the blood pours out, Taya vows he will eliminate him no matter what. Dayan seizes her weapon and instructs her master to step back. However, the maniac grabs the pistol and declares he'll take care of it himself. Aiming the gun at his cousin, Chong inquires if he genuinely believes he's the hero in this tale. Insisting that he is the protagonist, he calls him a thug and orders the boy to perish. As he tumbles, Taeyong manages to dodge the lethal shots, although he is struck elsewhere. Consequently, he plummets into freefall. Just after they shut the helicopter door, his bodyguard calls the hospital reporting an emergency. The protagonist was falling from an incredible height. Fortunately, he collides with a tree, slowing his drop. Even so, he crashes his back against the house's wall. Then he lands on a truck tumbling down near a stream. A passerby on a bicycle happens to spot the scene. The individual halts and gazes in his direction. It was one of the victims Tay had saved from the security firm earlier. The guy recognizes that it was the man who had rescued him. Observing his condition, he wonders if he arrived too late, but then he hears a cry for assistance. Looking back towards Tay, he attempts to examine more closely. The protagonist was asking for assistance, barely managing to stay conscious. Even severely injured, he kept insisting it wasn't finished yet and continued to beg for help. On a messaging app, someone had sent an 11-minute voice note. The individual was seeking assistance, stating that the man had refused the breathalyzer test 3 times and kept claiming he was Congressman Kim. That man was typing something while listening to the audio of former Director Kim using his influence to intimidate the police. He asked someone if that voice and name were distinct enough. The person wondered where the director was at that time. The young man replied that he was probably at the police station giving a statement and would soon return home. His partner seemed a bit reluctant, so the guy offered 200 and questioned if that was sufficient to catch a significant figure from the majority party. For a while, the only notification was that the other person was typing. But to his surprise, the counteroffer was 30. Naturally, he was extremely irked, asserting that it was worth much more. However, the buyer remarked that it wasn't even election season, so nobody cared about those old men. The guy suggested that the buyer didn't grasp the current market, explaining that a regular person was worth 1x, a celebrity 10x. But if it was someone connected to Chianggu, the value was 1,000 times greater. Taking a deep breath, he recognized everything revolved around the Chianggu. After some time, the radio reported an incident at a tower. Uninterested in that news, the guy turned off the radio. He was preparing to depart, but instead of going to the street, he found himself in a restaurant. The owner was already getting things ready to open. The woman cautioned the boy that he'd be tardy if he lingered there. The boy replied he was okay and would arrive on time if he rode his skateboard, so she told him he'd eat something. However, if he did, he truly would be delayed. Suddenly, someone showed up and remarked that this chef ought to stop fooling around. A man came in saying the proprietor should sell the establishment before they ceased being courteous. Baksu asked the boy if he concurred with him. The woman inquired if they were already there that morning to gather funds, asserting that delinquents really knew how to keep busy. She advised the boy not to fret and to head to school, saying nothing would alter anyway. Though he was annoyed, there was nothing he could do. Grabbing a knife, the thug remarked she shouldn't speak so hastily, claiming she was already 2 months overdue. The man instructed a woman to sell the property and collect as much as she could, stating that their interests coincided. She asserted she'd never sell that place for pennies, telling him to at least grasp basic math before returning. Meanwhile, the boy was at his station awaiting his ride. Worn out from it all, he simply sat uncertain of what to do. He confessed that in his neighborhood, the disputes over redevelopment were out of hand. With conflicts between factions like Xianggu and Ozan, it was a highly neglected area, transforming into a lawless territory where small gangs attempted to take advantage of the residents. People like him and that woman had nowhere else to turn. Upon returning, the restaurant owner had several bruises on her face. Still, she merely asked him to wipe down the tables. Concerned, he questioned her about what happened to her face. A customer mentioned he saw some Yaburi men leaving earlier, clearly upset. The man said they were likely trying to pressure individuals into selling their properties for redevelopment. She told him not to worry and asked the boy to place his backpack in the back of the shop. The boy complied but angrily tossed everything aside. Frustrated, he muttered that he really needed to take action. He recalled that before his father passed away, Dr. Young Seok had been a close friend of his. She had once been a professor at a medical school but crossed paths with the Ojong gang. Yet she cared for him. None of it was her fault, just like with the restaurant. Even though her food was good and the dishes were always well prepared. Interrupting his thoughts, an idea flashed in his mind. He remembered what that guy had over the phone. After all, someone from the Chimbu group was worth 1,000 times the usual value. So the boy messaged him again. The man inquired if he had any updates. Despite feeling anxious, the boy shared everything he knew, sent some images that validated his account. Stating that one of the security guards for Jinbu's directors, Ju Hawk, was involved with Mio, the leader of the women. Still very frightened, he awaited the buyer's reply. Not fully comprehending, the man asked what the boy intended to do with that information, but quickly remembered the values mentioned before. The next day was a bright Saturday. Some men in suits approached and asked if he was Gray. He confirmed, but as he looked back, he instantly realized he shouldn't have done that. The man struck him in the stomach, knocking him unconscious and taking him to a van. As he was being taken away, Gray finally grasped why they offered so much. Ultimately, it was merely bait. The boy was bound and seated inside the security firm's office. The leader mentioned that initially, he considered him just an irritating informant, but in truth, the child was quite skilled. He inquired where he obtained those images, speculating if his father had concealed them prior to passing. The guy asked if the kid was Jingu's offspring, one of the individuals who reported Chi and Gu. Observing that, Gray offered a small grin. Removing his watch, the man questioned if he found it amusing. He then struck the boy in the face, asking if that was amusing as well. Continuing to hit him, the man inquired if he possessed more files similar to that one, inflicting more pain on the boy, hurling him to the floor and cursing him relentlessly. Even so, Gray couldn't suppress his laughter and kept chuckling. Still laughing, he remarked that the old man resembled a piece of trash he uses as a toilet, asserting that if he had more, he would have already sold them. The hefty man commanded his men to fetch the hammer. The man threatened to tear out all of the boy's teeth until he comprehended that this wasn't a game. But fortunately for him, one of the guards summoned the old man. His subordinate reported that a central dispatch order had just arrived, indicating that they needed to ensure security for an emergency meeting. Rising, he stated that if it was genuinely a level 1 priority, they needed to leave immediately. Thus, he instructed them to tape the boy's mouth and confine him in the room. Kicking him inside, the fat man declared he would return to finish this later. Inside, there was already an elderly man alongside a woman. Still on the ground, he uttered that his father was a fool. Fueled by his absurd sense of justice, he made no attempt to expose Qiangu. He merely perished in a car accident with his mother, and instead he ought to have hidden away to lead a peaceful existence working for them. Regardless of how crucial the information his father possessed, as long as he remained defenseless, it would all be futile. However, they start to hear the guards questioning who that person was. Gunfire and screams abruptly merge together. Even the leader panicked, calling for his men to eliminate the intruder. Everyone begins to panic, uncertain of what is occurring. Suddenly, the massive door before them bursts open. The protagonist hands them a knife and instructs them to use it to liberate themselves and escape. Then he assures them that none of the three ever saw him there. They don't fully grasp what just transpired. They start to leave, expressing their gratitude for his assistance. That's when the boy glanced around behind him one last time. Gazing at the bodies, Gray ponders if that man accomplished all of this on his own. Sometime later, he finally returns home. Young Seok asks what happened to his face and where he had been all that time. She grows increasingly upset, demanding he explain, but Gray insists that nothing happened. With a smile, a girl tells her not to worry. The boy heads to his room. The woman observes him, clearly worried. As soon as he enters his room, he collapses onto the floor. Still rattled, the boy wonders if it was the Ojong gang that sent that man there. After all, they had firearms, yet he killed them with just 2 knives as if it were trivial. While opening his drawer to search for something, the boy continues to wonder if that individual was dispatched by someone. Shutting it, he suspects there may be something more to all of this, thinking it could be a vengeance scheme. He recalls the moment the department head brought up his father, wondering if he had additional files connected to Qiangu. The boy concedes that regardless of how crucial the information is, it's pointless unless you possess the authority to utilize it. While he accesses the documents, Gray states he requires power. The man remarks that it's nearly impossible to locate him among those files just by his appearance, but he remembers something one of the subordinates mentioned when he referred to an urgent meeting. With that, he recalls the Level 1 priority code, accessing the Qinbu Partnership Directive. Noticing that it was also recorded in his father's files, he says he finally discovered it. It indicated that in the case of a significant incident, the executive members would convene at the Bugok Mountain Annex. However, even with all that information, the precise location was not disclosed. Giving up, Gray expresses that he doesn't care in any case. He doesn't even know that individual. Still, he asserts that not everyone who considers Chungu is regarded by them in return. On the police radio, the slaughter Taha was executing is reported, with multiple confirmed casualties. The extent of the destruction is unclear, but it's confirmed that the mansion was secretly utilized by Chungu executives. Rising, the boy realizes it can only be that man, so he decides to head there, taking his bike and departing in the middle of the night. Despite not knowing who that individual is nor his motives for all of this, the best choice he can make right now is to go there. That's when he noticed someone dangling from a helicopter. After following the sounds of gunfire and screams, the boy headed in the direction where the person might have fallen. However, upon seeing him in that condition, he thought the man was deceased. Noticing the blade in his hands and his plea for help, he sees his face as he proclaims that it's not finished. Gray is astonished by all that determination. Sometime later, he arrives home shouting for his adoptive mother. As usual, she was working. Alarmed, the woman asks who that is and what has happened to him. Desperate, the boy pleads with young Seok to rescue that person. Time passes. The protagonist is already improving and asks who he is and why he was rescued. Gray introduces himself and explains that he buys and sells information, claiming that he's been searching for something specific lately, saying that he hoped to find someone like him. Skeptical of his words, the protagonist questions if someone like him could genuinely be a data broker. The boy continues, saying he's more like a wholesale information trader, always providing excellent intel to his clients. Additionally, his primary clients are other information merchants and the financial sector of Yoeto. He clarifies that he nearly perished after falling into Chimgu's trap, believing he was about to meet a fellow informant. Taya asks if the boy was one of the hostages from that day, wondering if he could recognize him even after seeing him just once. Gray confirms he did, saying he wants to earn an award for the youngest data broker or something similar. With that, the protagonist begins looking around, noticing the item the boy possesses. Then he asks how many days he has been there, and the boy replies it's been 4 days. The man ponders if he truly slept that long. Still, he calls for Gray and inquires if this alleged broker could locate someone for him. But regrettably, he has to confess he was exaggerating, stating it was challenging enough just finding him, and he would need another broker for that. Moreover, locating someone necessitates a substantial amount of money, and most importantly, he would like to request something in return for saving him, since he incurred significant medical expenses. Disregarding everything else, the protagonist asks if what the boy is implying is that he cannot find him. Gray questions what the man would do if he couldn't. However, Tama merely turns away and says it's fine. Grabbing his coat, he expresses gratitude to the boy for his assistance and mentions he will eliminate him once everything is settled. The boy questions if he is truly departing just like that, but the protagonist replies he still has issues to resolve. As a final piece of advice, he cautions the boy not to interfere or attempt to stop him since this won't conclude with merely one abduction. Fearful, Gray simply sits back down in his chair, but shortly he smiles, realizing that apparently, that's how things operate. After exiting the boy's room, he detects a strong scent of pork and wonders if that place is a restaurant. To his surprise, Taeyang-suk remarks that the boy shouldn't be awake yet. She explains he was struck by .22 caliber bullets, which made it feasible to stitch him up, but his fractures aren't stabilized. He'll be lost even if a physician assists him again. Politely thanking her, the protagonist states she must be the doctor who saved him and assures her he will compensate her. But she insists she isn't a doctor, claiming she owns a gukbap eatery and requests he not return if his stitches come undone. So the protagonist steps outside. Scanning his surroundings, he wonders if this is a marketplace. Disregarding these matters, Taeyang picks up a phone. Upon answering, he states it's not his phone. Gray explains he's broke, and until it's repaired, he can hold on to that one. He mentions there should also be a box in his pocket with earbuds, asking the protagonist to utilize them. Taking the device, surprised by its size, the boy explains about the battery, connection, and microphone, also warning that the first button on the shirt is a camera. The protagonist asserts he was very clear, claiming the boy will perish if he gets involved with him. However, to his astonishment, the boy inquires why he's targeting the Jinbu family. The kid asks him not to be shocked after all, even though Korea is chaotic, something like that wouldn't go unnoticed. The entire nation fell into turmoil while he was unconscious, with news stating the whole Chingu family was a victim of terrorism. Tayo questions why the boy seeks a favor from him even with that knowledge. The kid explains that in that area there are numerous power struggles between Ojong and Chingu to gain redevelopment rights. Besides the two gangs encroaching upon that territory, there are many other issues complicating life. Even so, since the protagonist issue appears to be more pressing, he'll assist. But in return, he desires help in the future. Until everything is resolved, they must maintain contact. But Atai declines, permitting him to hand him over to Chingu. Clearly, the man dislikes that entirely. Nevertheless, he states he wants to see what a brat is capable of. Sometime later, he's already strolling through a busier area, heading toward an upscale building. Tay had gone to a sort of bank where he possessed a private vault. There, he opens one of the drawers, searching for something. Gray acknowledges he was unaware a company like that existed in Seoul, asking if they could be tracked through it. But the protagonist clarifies that these firms operate on trust, so they would never contemplate making deals with other businesses. He mentions people generally go there to conceal jewelry or secrets, making it the safest place imaginable. Observing this, the boy realizes that this guy is evidently ready to go undercover. He becomes contemplative, watching Tay's actions. Confused, since the assassin lacked any firearms and a knife wouldn't suffice. Numerous drops of sweat begin to fall to the ground. His body was growing heavier, making it difficult to maintain a neutral expression and also feeling like he was being pierced, experiencing the same sensation as when Ray Juni used to hit him. The protagonist asks if the boy located the individual he requested him to find. He inquires if the CEO of the company Nightmove Piljong is the broker who assisted him in entering Korea. Apparently, he worked in Europe, gained notoriety in the field, and is now searching for a smuggling vessel to go to China. Gray explains that border pressure escalated after the man did what he did to the Qingbu family. The protagonist instructs the boy to inform the merchants that a vessel is available at rates 10 times higher than usual. His companion questions what he'll do when he locates that guide, pondering if Taho wishes to depart with him. Sheathing his knives, he states he's going to eliminate him. The reason he nearly perished that day was that someone disclosed his information. The only person who knew his whereabouts was Piljong. Coldly, the protagonist asserts that traitors deserve to die. Later in a church, he confesses he doesn't care if it's a longtime friend or not, as a hooded figure enters the chapel. Approaching the confessional, the man calls for the priest and requests a conversation. Using a specific phrase, each brings water to their own mill. Piljong complains about how suffocating that place is, questioning why they are meeting in a holy location. He claims it may not appear so, but nonetheless he's a devout Catholic. However, the so-called priest merely asks where the money is. The informant reaches into his bag for the cash. Displaying 100 mils and 1,001, the man remarks it would have been more lucrative to convert that into $10,000. Changing the topic, Piljong mentions he needs to clarify something. After all, the country is full of con artists like him, so he can't place his trust in the priest. Gray cautions that there are many men outside. Suddenly, several individuals enter wielding melee weapons. The man states it's quite peculiar that someone managed to secure a ship which even he, a person dealing with information, couldn't locate. Claiming that the rule in that line of work is clear: if someone deceives, they must pay with their life. Admitting that the protagonist must be prepared to confront the repercussions of his actions. But leaving the man astonished, Taya remarks he can hardly believe he wouldn't recognize his own friend's voice. Piljong is in disbelief, stating they had assured him they had killed him. The man quickly realizes there's no point in continuing the conversation. Even so, he claims he was a fool and suspected something as soon as he realized the password was an Italian phrase. Attempting to clarify, his friend states he lost everything due to gambling, ended up in Korea, and accrued massive debts in Chengdu's casinos. As he reaches for his weapon, Piljong tries to persuade him that he wouldn't have disclosed anything if he had known they would attempt to kill him. But before he can complete his statement, Taya bursts through the confessional wall and drives a blade through his throat. He panics, trying to staunch the bleeding from his neck. The men outside inquire about what's happening. Through the camera on the protagonist's shirt button, it was possible to see the man's body and all the blood that had spread. Obviously, Cray is horrified. Despite all his injuries, enough to make most people barely able to walk, Taha was still willing to fight. Exiting the booth, the protagonist states that Pilgrim surely instructed them not to bring firearms to prevent conflicts. The psychopath tells everyone to pray before they commence, asking them to inform God that they'll soon be with him, stating that it doesn't matter whether they're hired hands or subordinates of his friend. Gray felt lost, not knowing what to do upon witnessing all that. The protagonist mentions that merely the fact they are armed with bats and knives is sufficient for him to view them as a threat to his life. In that case, he sees no reason to hold back. They question what that guy can possibly do with a broken arm. One of them charges forward to strike, saying that evidently there's money in the confessional. The protagonist merely prepares to take them down. The boy confesses that the assassin's broken arm isn't the only problem, since he has fractured ribs and gunshot wounds. However, he moves fluidly as he dodges the strike. And with a single motion, he pierces the back of his opponent's neck, already shifting to attack the next one. Again, he evades the blow while slashing the man's throat. Swiftly, he hurls a dagger into another man's neck. One of them rushes in to attempt and stab. However, John Wick utilizes the sling to restrain the foe. In an instant, he delivers an elbow strike with his other arm. With that, Tade had conquered everyone who attacked him in a flash. He mentions that when someone takes the advantage early on, it's difficult for the opponents to maintain their poise. Considering all that cash waving in front of their eyes, it was clear adrenaline would seize control. Even so, among them there was still someone else. Someone possessed something they shouldn't, yet some of those men charge at him. The protagonist takes a simple step forward and by doing so, vanishes before everyone's gaze. Using his speed, he dashes past the men. Clearly, his aim was to eliminate the one most capable of injuring him. The two who had moved up to attack him are utterly baffled. Yoon Gray can't comprehend what just occurred. With that, the weapon falls to the ground after his rush. He calmly begins turning to the others, asking who's next. Despite all that turmoil outside, the church appeared unaffected. In the parking lot, only one vehicle was parked at that hour. Gray was inside, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Assuming that man doesn't even seem human, since even with a battered body, he still accomplished all that. Suddenly, Tay calls out to the boy and asks if he can hear him. The protagonist requests the kid to go to the confessional and grab a bag of cash, since he no longer has the energy for it. The kid asks, frightened, what he means, but the man says he knows he's in the area. After all, he warned him about the men before they even appeared. Gray doesn't know what to say in that moment. Even a bit anxious, he simply accepts the task. So the boy exits the vehicle and heads towards the church. With that, the boy approaches the door. A bit reluctant, he opens the doors. Before him, the church was entirely stained with blood and corpses. Sitting on one of the pews was the protagonist. He says he's up there. Even more anxious, Gray starts to walk. Arriving at the booth, he notices the body of the protagonist's former companion. He feels slightly nauseated after all. There were corpses strewn all over the place. The boy states he called a cab, indicating it should arrive in the next 10 minutes. However, observing his companion, the boy realizes Taha is in very poor condition. He inquires what's wrong with him, saying he'll call young Seok and ask her to prepare some medicine for them. But the lunatic stabs his phone. At that moment, Gray is paralyzed with fear. Removing a glove, the protagonist notes that when he woke up, his clothes and phone had been switched. But the oddest part was that his gloves remained on his hands. Clearly, the boy just listens without uttering a word. On Taina's hand, the emblem of the Salerno family was marked. Observing the boy, the man asserts he knows who he is up against. Gray simply nods, stating his name, his father's name, and mentioning that he is the grandson of the deceased president of the Chiengu group. He is the sole Asian associate in the Italian Salerno Mafia, aged between 20 and 30, with a bounty of 5,500,000 on his head. The boy maintains he wasn't scheming against anyone, stating not even the lady is aware, claiming he simply requires his assistance. Tay inquires if that amount is worth more than the chance of losing his life or claiming the bounty on his head. Gray attempts to explain that the reason he and his adoptive mother are living in seclusion is due to the Chiengu, but the protagonist interrupts him, reassuring him that the wisest decision would have been to surrender him to Chiengu rather than going through all of this. Recalling their earlier conversation when the kid expressed his desire to win a prize by becoming the youngest broker. Realizing that the reason his career has plateaued despite being capable of more and even engaging in the field, which nobody in the industry typically does, is because of his inexperience. This is why top informants tend to be older. With that, he asks if Gray wishes to enter a much larger arena. Shortly after, in a spacious contemporary building, two individuals are walking down the corridor while one instructs the other to only respond to what is directly asked. Huimin becomes annoyed and assures he would never divulge anything that could disadvantage Oh Jong. His companion remarks that individuals from the gang aren't exactly renowned for being articulate. Even annoyed, the man can't dispute it. The two enter as the man apologizes for keeping the person waiting. Back at the chapel, Taida commends the boy's efforts, stating he will grant a favor, but also wants them to collaborate afterward. He mentions that Gray will be putting his life at risk and won't have an easy death if caught. However, he could become exceptional if they join forces. The protagonist affirms that's a promise. After all, he intends to bring down Chiengu once and for all. The leader of Ojong acknowledges he didn't anticipate their call coming so soon. After all, they realize that Chiang must be preoccupied with his relative's funeral. They assure they wouldn't have gone anywhere before reaching out, but the man raises his hand, signaling for silence. Both are fearful of what could occur. The peculiar man makes a small hand gesture, asking for quiet. With that, he begins to nod his head in agreement. A type of speaker starts playing music. He lifts his clenched fist, striking a sort of defiance pose. The two Ojong gang members don't comprehend its meaning. Still, someone begins to applaud. The guy with Human comments that it's unfortunate they arrived just as the performance was concluding. Jiang asks if he recognizes that piece. The man states its exact title but observes that the composition sounded disjointed, assuming perhaps it was due to his performance. That clearly displeases the lunatic. He instructs his bodyguard to turn it off. While Diane uncovers her ears, the man remarks that was a 6th grade piano contest, suggesting he hasn't practiced since. Additionally, all the relatives who attended to watch him that day are now deceased. The man asks if they know what transpired, assuring them that had they known who was coming, they wouldn't have been so vulnerable. However, Huiman insists he did alert them, advising they should have even canceled the meeting since the assassin was not just anyone. While stating it was Chung who ignored the warning, Chung interrupts him, telling him to put away that cigarette, asserting he was the one who knew best. This visibly frustrates him. Chung mentions it was a traditional emergency meeting of his family, something that could be canceled at a moment's notice, claiming that's why he paid 200,000 won for him to handle that man discreetly, without alarming the other members. The man rests his knee against a sort of cane. While touching his leg, he states that instead of managing the assassin, they incurred losses, and now he will even need to resort to that. With that, the man expresses his curiosity about how Huiman is still alive despite all the other guards perishing. The fellow claims he already clarified that the assassin operates by his own principles and he didn't fit into those. With a grin, the Luminix remarks that perhaps a terrorist principle is to avoid collateral damage. Clearly, this enrages Human. He instructs the fellow to stop spouting nonsense, questioning if they genuinely believe he jeopardized the honor of his organization and parents. Shung responds that it must be nice to have parents backing you, asserting that even if he wished, Iser is already 6 feet under. Suddenly, the other Ojong member adjusts his spectacles, getting ready to intervene. The man inquires who is accountable for managing the so-called terrorist. The fellow assures it shouldn't be a matter of debate. It was Mr. Junsu. The girl glances at the elder man with suspicion once again. Huiman's associate queries the bodyguard directly. The man clearly confirms at once. Yet even he appears somewhat skeptical. He states he comprehends and asks what Chiang desires from them. Illuminate asserts he doesn't care about money or matters like that. He merely wants to ensure they remain silent about the occurrence. And if anyone inquires, Huimin has never encountered the assassin before. The fellow doesn't grasp why they're attempting to bury the issue. His companion ignites a cigarette, asking if that's truly all they seek. Chiang tries to make him extinguish the cigarette again, but Jian-su touches his shoulder. Startled, the man looks at his bodyguard, who speaks on his behalf and assures both that it will suffice. The Ojong representative states he requires some time to process everything, inquiring if the bodyguard would also appreciate a cigarette. But the man expresses gratitude and states he's given up the habit. However, Chung pounds the table, growing more furious. He questions if they're not afraid. After all, he'll soon be the new president, questioning what that old worm is doing. The fellow strings together insults and tells that little brat to recognize his place. Rising, he states that's what his boss would say, and that's why he's in that position. Bidding farewell, the man addresses the bodyguard directly, saying they agree to the conditions. Tossing the cigarette butt on the floor, the man instructs them to have an ashtray next time, and preferably a wet napkin as well. With that, the three are left in the room in deepening silence. Xiang remains silent for a few moments, not saying or doing anything. Huimin comments that he truly is something else. After all, he dismantled all of Chingu's arrogance using just his words. Adjusting his glasses again, he states that's his function there, since apparently Chang doesn't grasp how things operate, claiming that the former president taught him nothing worthwhile and earned his fate for not addressing that brat sooner. The fellow is in disbelief, asking if he truly means to suggest that. Calmly, the old man asserts the incident was likely a coup orchestrated by Chenong to take the presidency. The elevator opens and they continue walking, declaring it's crucial that they locate the assassin who attacked the Chingu group. Hoi Min attempts to say the guy is dead, but his companion assures him that's not the case. After all, Junsu is powerful but never takes lives. At that moment, he asks the old man if he confirmed his suspicions. The fellow is even more astonished by all the unforeseen turns. He claims it's improbable the man was hired by Cheong since Shinsu lost numerous men. The assassin was merely utilized in the end. Hyun Min states that when he met him, the so-called terrorist mentioned he hadn't been to Korea in quite a while, asking if they should attempt to bring him to their side, perhaps even managing to take Changgu down entirely. Nevertheless, the old man states that would be beneficial, but regardless, if they locate him, they must eliminate him. The fellow struggles to grasp the reasoning behind everything before. Yet, the old man concedes what annoys him is the notion that Chung assumed Human isn't capable of facing the assassin. That's why the next time they encounter, he must demonstrate who's in charge. Jeppel confesses he's not particularly fond of Ojong, but still despises witnessing one of his men getting defeated. Back inside, as some ice cubes tumbles into a container, Chum asserts there's one thing he has become exceptionally skilled at. Grateful to his father, he inquires if either of them wishes to take a guess. The room still had the shattered coffee table, and both bodyguards remain still. As he pours the whiskey into the glass, the man states he's adept at picking up on various signals. He mentions that when that old man questioned if Dao was truly dead, the atmosphere felt as if everyone was breathless. Settling back on the couch, Chung explains his bodyguard guaranteed him he had taken care of his cousin. However, Taehi leaped and sustained an injury to his leg. In addition to that, his remains have yet to be discovered. Bringing the glass near his lips, he halts for a brief moment. With a horrifying stare, the man wonders if Taehi is still among the living. Jaeon-soo asks if the fellow is implying that he should allow the former young master to flee. The old man insists he was the one who shot the boy from the helicopter. Jang remarks that if he had executed his duties properly, that wouldn't have been necessary. The bodyguard acknowledges that the boy was more formidable than he anticipated. Enraged, he hurls his glass at the counter. He states it's time to move forward now. As he departs, the man declares his priority is the council meeting, asserting he needs to secure their votes to join the committee. The psychopath states that whether Taehoon is alive or not, the old man cannot betray him, asking President Jeon-soo if he isn't correct. The old man reassures that he never reneges on his commitments. They proceed to the rooftop towards the helicopter. Yo-min was already awaiting them. Chiang is astonished to see that the guard managed to survive. The man expresses that this is unlike what he was assured, requesting to reconsider his reassignment. He claims to have served the Chimhu family for an extended period, so he shouldn't be relegated to merely being a director's bodyguard. Frustrated, he states if he had known this outcome would occur, he would never have betrayed his previous employer. The lunatic advances and asks who informed the guard he could get beaten up. Before taking any action, Young Min glances at Dae-in, who simply bows his head. His boss tells him to be thankful he wasn't discarded after his poor contributions. Still, he shouts out, calling for Jiansu. The old man advises him to remain calm for now, saying he will get in touch later. With that, the helicopter begins to ascend. Yo-min merely observes them. Somewhere in a less developed part of the city stood Ms. Young-suk's eatery. Tae mentions he now realizes why Gray was able to recognize him since his late father was a researcher at the firm. The boy explains that with a tattoo on the back of his hand and the search for the 20-year-old Asian linked to the Jeju massacre, it all clicked. Assuring it's not so bad, the protagonist praises him, stating it wasn't bad at all. His adoptive mother remarks it appears he has plenty of free time. Young Seok states that for someone from Jinbu to return for revenge, there must be plans, stating the boy shouldn't merely be lounging around talking. Making Gray cough out his food, he asks if she would betray him just to keep him occupied. At that instant, the psychopath whispers to himself that traitors deserve to perish. His friend attempts to lighten the atmosphere, but the woman claims it's only just. She states there's no way a murderer who spent his life for the mafia can easily put faith in others. Nonetheless, the protagonist mentions he was merely addressing some issues that would be more crucial in case of emergencies. He urges the lady not to fret, asserting that anyone despised by Qiangu or Ojong is not his adversary. Thus, Taigo resumes eating tranquilly. They both come to realize the assassin is likely indicating he could handle them in the future if he's betrayed. Suddenly, those thugs enter the restaurant, complaining about the heat. One of them instructs the woman to crank the AC to maximum, questioning how she intends to pay her dues if the patrons don't linger. Young Suk asserts she has settled everything and inquires why they're causing a ruckus again. She tells Taya to return after lunch in a smoke, also sending Gray off to school. Park Soo advises her to disregard him, assuring that he won't harm the two. However, he appears puzzled and annoyed about something. He claims he's never spotted that boy around there, questioning how someone could end up dining at a place like that. Meanwhile, the protagonist is taken aback by the size of the radish kimchi. Furious, the guy demands to know if the brat is choking on the food or something. Standing up, Gray informs the lady he's on his way to school. He walks towards the exit while glancing back. He recalls he asked his friend to promise something before hearing his requests. He tells Taha not to kill or engage in anything like that, pleading with him not to incite the neighbors against one another. The protagonist questions if the boy believes he would pursue people recklessly, but Gray insists that's precisely what he did. Returning to the topic, the guy asks what his request is. His friend reminds him that the 3rd district of Jiangsu is at a standstill between Xianggu and Ozhong. When those disputes were on the verge of erupting into chaos due to a local gang Yaburi, the conflict was halted. Yet Tae asks if a minor gang truly managed to prevent a power struggle between Xianggu and Ozhong. Gray reiterates that the safety of everyone was secured by Yaburi. However, they are also acquiring buildings to establish a housing cooperative so they can negotiate in future scenarios. The protagonist observes that it seems he disagrees with that. He states that if there was an agreement with a resolution, it would have been accomplished already, noting that the mayor was elected with Ojong's backing. Furthermore, young Seok attempted to converse with the boss, but apparently, she's not worth his time, asking Taeha to represent her. Nonetheless, he couldn't kill or cause irreversible harm to anyone. The protagonist concedes that, from his perspective, they're merely ordinary thugs, but they managed to make the crime leaders retreat. He simply stands up thanking the lady. Baksu, irritated, asks if he's truly going to disregard him. He tries to pursue the brat, but young Seok intervenes. The woman states she already requested him not to disturb her patrons, asserting she has already paid and asking what the ugly guy is doing there. The guy raises his hand to strike her, inquiring who she's calling ugly. But Taya halts the slap using a bowl. So even before Gray departs from the shop, the 3 of them go flying through the door. The protagonist trails right behind them. The boy couldn't believe the Lumedic accomplished all that in under 10 seconds. Terrified on the ground, Baksu questions if the brat even realizes who he is. As he approaches the men, the guy mentally concedes that his revenge consists of $30 schemes. Despite all the planning, some aspects remained uncertain. After all, Ganon believed his true enemy would be Chiang. Due to that, he sees this as a setback, but mentions he might be able to infer his strategy for the future. Even with his Jin family heritage, he'll still need to be chosen as president by the board. Therefore, he plans to utilize the development of the Jiangsu district to provoke the board, asking the delinquents to lead him to their leader. As they inquire if the boy is insane, a girl from across the street questions his identity. Suri asks if he intends to instigate a war against her gang all on his own. However, Tanaka simply replies negatively. He calmly picks up his cigarette and ignites it, stating he's only present to converse. Shuri asks what he implies by that, claiming that there's no way she can accept it with her men sprawled on the ground while he makes such a statement. Nevertheless, the protagonist merely glances at them, grasping the situation. The boy expresses regret, stating they don't seem keen on hearing him, so he doesn't want to speak to individuals like that either. Looking upward, Tae realizes that's how they managed to compel both sides to retreat. With armed men distributed across all the buildings, he asserts that if these guys seized control of the entire city, the 3rd district of Jiangxia would become the stronghold of these armed forces. Furthermore, if even one of them was formerly an officer, it's guaranteed they possess a highly effective system. He ponders if this is how Korea prepares itself. The girl remarks that she can heed his final words, requesting him to be concise, calling him a bastard from Ojong or Cheonggu. Naturally, that makes the guy furious. But before he can move an inch, a bullet strikes the pavement in front of him. Sori instructs him to reveal where he's from unless he wants to be filled with holes. The girl insists he should hurry up. However, that only makes the assassin more frustrated. Clenching his fist, he says he anticipated this day would arrive, stating he can't fathom the day unfolding in such a repulsive manner. Her guards caution her that it's perilous, asking if they should eliminate him. She quickly calls for someone named Horian. Her subordinate leaps off the building, landing swiftly in front of the protagonist. The guy was enormous, literally known as Tank. He stands still, glaring down at the kid. But contrary to expectations, Taya merely tells the guard to move aside. The man stands there, staring, Surprisingly, though, he obeys the protagonist's command, leaving Suri entirely baffled by the guard's actions. The girl asks how he could betray her in such a way while her other subordinates rush in. Unexpectedly, the assassin just snatches the milkshake she was drinking. Discarding it, he remarks that it's no surprise nothing she does goes according to plan. This clearly leaves her stunned, not understanding what just occurred. He inches closer to her face while glancing toward the building, whispering something in her ear. She's left confused and terrified by how things are unfolding. As he walks away, the protagonist remarks that either way, they don't appear to be worth his time. The girl was still frozen while her men ask if they shouldn't pursue him. However, she calmly approaches Warion. The man confesses he couldn't sense any kind of danger from the protagonist. The girl asks if that's why he allowed that maniac to get so near her, asserting that her gang is genuinely united. Smiling, the guy asks if she sensed it too, claiming that even he was able to perceive it, stating it's been a long time since the war, long enough to forget what it's like to witness something genuine. Later, still at the ladies' restaurant, they were working to fix the door back into position. Gray asks his companion to hold it steady while he secures it. They repair the restaurant's entrance. Both announce it's all finished, stating the door now shuts correctly. While young Seok asks if he is confident he fixed it properly, Gray reassures her he did and pleads with her to provide them some food. Of course, she reprimands Taha, warning if he damages anything again, she'll toss him out of there. She was still admonishing him since the door was costly, but then Suri shows up and breaks it once more. The girl asks what's the issue with that door. Embracing Mowing Suck, the girl says she missed her and inquires how she's been. Tugging at the girl's cheeks, the woman asks when these troublemakers will allow her door to see daylight. Observing that, the protagonist reflects that the girl is entirely different from how she was earlier that day. Once more, someone positions the door back in place. Besides fixing the door, Shuri mentions she heard Baksu laid a hand on the lady last time. Apologizing, she claims she broke all his fingers to ensure he never does something like that again. However, the woman instructs her to complete fixing the door and go eat, mentioning the girl is skin and bones. Gray explains to the protagonist that during a conflict that occurred there, Yang-sik assisted in treating many members of Yaburi. He also treated Sori's father for free several times, which is why they consider her their savior. Taya asks aloud how gang lackeys can treat someone who is seen as their boss's savior so rudely. Clearly, the girl dislikes hearing that. Looking at her, the protagonist states everyone refers to her as the boss, but the girl is merely a symbolic figure. She lunges at him, coiling several wires around him, concentrating particularly on his neck. Suri curses at him, stating she's been lenient from the start, but the girl doesn't appear appreciative. Confident, the girl requests him to repeat what he said. The protagonist realizes those wires aren't ordinary, noticing their tension is unusual. To her astonishment, the guy claims she must know that better than he does. He mentions that among those men who were stationed inside the built-ins when he was there, some seem to have their weapons aimed at a specific location. Instead of targeting the intruder, they were aiming at their own boss, stating that while everything externally appears like a stalemate, she acts like nothing more than a puppet controlled from behind. At the moment he approached her, the boy requested Suri to meet him at the ladies' restaurant since there were too many spies present, inquiring who instructed them to purchase the properties there, wondering if it was Ojong. While the girl tightens the wire, the protagonist asserts there's only one last option, asking if it was Chingu. But the girl pulls the wire back furiously, yet to her surprise all the wires had snapped. With his dagger in hand, Taya states he got his answer. Elsewhere in the city, in an opulent house, a man was pounding on a glass window, pleading with the director to save him, stating that even with the failed deal with Lebanon, he guarantees he'll double the revenue in 2 months. On the other hand, the director was on the phone, asking what happened. The spy states an intruder approached Suri earlier, claiming the boy might have noticed them and asking how he should proceed. A cage begins to open with some feline inside. A famished lion steps out into the same yard where the man was. Desperate, the guy tells the animal to stay back, pleading with the director frantically, asking for another chance. But as anticipated, the man does nothing, allowing the guy to be killed and devoured by the beast. In the photograph he received, the protagonist's face was fully visible, making the director find it intriguing. Ingyu orders them to bring the brat to him, alive. Taya mentions that apparently the one behind the entire 3rd district was indeed Chingu. Moreover, the reason the girl hasn't dealt with them is because she's being threatened. Suri begins to complain about who that guy is. After all, he cut through her wires as if they were nothing, though they're her best weapons crafted from Kevlar fiber. She indirectly probes who he is. The protagonist reassures her that he's merely the top person in the entire nation at eliminating Jingu. That clearly leaves her even more perplexed. He asserts that a Jingu is her dilemma. He suggests he can assist her. Gray confirms that she can trust the protagonist. She's taken aback when the elderly lady shows up. Young Seek also tells Sori she can rely on that guy. That surprises her even further since the woman typically doesn't interfere in anything. With that, she rises from the table. As she strolls away, the girl states that if it were merely a question of eliminating a few individuals, everything would have already been resolved. Annoyed, she laments that this is her final warning and instructs Teha to exit the district. She departs, leaving the 3 behind at the restaurant. Later, the protagonist and the elderly woman are smoking outside. He expresses gratitude for her earlier attempt to help when she urged the girl to trust him if the situation involved dealing with Chi and Gu members. Yet Yang Sik simply states it's the truth, complaining if there's anyone else capable of standing up to them in this nation. The protagonist inquires who secretly orchestrated all that chaos within Chianggu. The woman reveals it was the director of the electric company, Inu, assuring him that that worm is always behind everything. She explains that when the previous leader of the Yabiri, Suri's father, nearly perished in the redevelopment war, that man took him to the hospital. But only they know that the rest of the community believes he died because if they knew, there would be opposition, and they'd all end up dead. Young Seok admits she would rather everything be resolved without Suri's father dying and asks if Tae-hai could assist. They fall silent for a moment. Someone reports being B1 and warns that the target is in their sights. They ask if there was any discussion and the spy confirms, stating that young Seok asked the intruder for help, claiming that the man is harder to interpret so he doesn't know what the response was. This was a mercenary from the private company Peak. The person on the opposite end raises the possibility that the guy is a mercenary. B1 states that either way they simply need to take him in alive. His partner inquires about the woman and the boy from the restaurant, but the mercenary claims they're unnecessary, asserting they'll just eliminate them all. But Tae was already right behind him. The guy becomes extremely startled when he notices his presence. The protagonist swiftly strikes his hand, preventing him from drawing his weapon, closing the gap between them quickly. His colleague asks what happened if B1 is alright. Instructs him to respond already, but the mercenary is still trying to pull out the knife that was embedded in his hand. Meanwhile, the boy calmly approaches the spot where his adversary had been observing him earlier. He picks up the radio lying on the ground, identifying himself as B1 and reassuring them not to worry, saying goodbye and that he'll see them soon. Sometime later the next day, at Chinbu's private hospital, a guy eats something while stating that he requested all contracts be finalized yesterday, asking if Shuri took his words seriously. The girl replies she's attempting to persuade everyone to sign the papers, saying that way they'll avoid issues later. Her father was breathing through machines, clearly struggling. Inyu states he truly doesn't regard useless individuals as human beings. While stabbing something into the man's leg, the lunatic claims they're just pieces of meat from his perspective. Naturally, the girl is horrified and screams at him. Still poking her father with the fork, the director states the machines are beeping like crazy, claiming that proves he's alive, saying he's doing his utmost to keep that chunk of meat alive. Suri, extremely shaken, assures him she understands, saying she'll bring all the signed documents at any cost. She trembles as she pleads with Inju to stop, saying she'll do exactly as he requested. He grips the girl by the face as she pleads with him to leave her father alone. The weirdo refers to her as a lady of the night, promising her that if she obeys all his commands, everything will turn out fine. Clearly, she's enraged. She feels powerless. The Creek mentions he enjoys seeing that rebellious expression, asserting it's worth subduing her. Showing her a document, the man inquires if she met that individual yesterday. Looking down, she still appears somewhat bewildered. The girl gazes at a picture of the protagonist while Ingyu expresses his desire to meet him, requesting her to bring him before the day concludes. She stops weeping, still staring at the image. As he departs, the man reminds her not to forget, saying she has a lot at stake if she betrays them. A doctor bows before the director. The man strolls casually toward the elevator. While he tries to call someone who doesn't answer, another individual was also in the elevator. Inju is annoyed, questioning what those delinquents are doing that prevents them from responding, stating he instructed them to locate Tae. He continues grumbling while eyeing the other person inside. As expected, it's the protagonist who simply looks at the director. The man attempts to say something, but the boy just slices off his ear. Not fully comprehending what occurred, Inju glances down and sees the piece that was severed. Naturally, he begins screaming in anguish. Taige mentions he heard about it through rumors, suggesting that apparently the director was after him. The man questions if the protagonist even knows who he is. Attempting to finish with a blow, Inju asks how the boy dares to touch him. Recalling that during his discussion with Young Suk, she informed him that in the redevelopment war, Kyung-hoo hired mercenaries. They were men from the Peak Company, merciless assassins who do anything for cash. The protagonist questions if the director truly believed everything would be resolved by simply throwing more money at it. Grabbing the mercenaries' dog tags, Taha declares that if the man desires bloodshed, he better be ready to see his own spill. He tosses all the tags into the lunatic's mouth. The psychopath guarantees Ingyu that regardless of when or where, he will find him and stab him daily from now on. With that, he instructs him to prepare and take aim, saying the hunt begins now. After a while, the man was sprinting frantically, questioning what was occurring. He collapsed to the ground as the protagonist approached him calmly. The director screamed, begging him to halt. Crying, he begged him not to come any closer. Taya had eliminated all the guards, which clarified his composed demeanor. The boy stabbed his leg. He told the man to stop being melodramatic, assuring him that the femoral area has plenty of muscle, so he wouldn't suffer a grave injury. As he withdrew the blade, the protagonist remarked that compared to other places he had struck, this one wasn't so severe. Wiping his knife, he stated he would see him tomorrow. After a while, a sort of festive painting appears. Chawang drinks wine as he reveals that out of the 15 directors, 7 are his supporters. 6 back the vice president, and the last 2 are neutral. He asserts that in trying times they should unite, lamenting that it's unfortunate. Another individual concurs, stating they can hardly imagine how troubled the late president would be by this. They claim the 2 neutral members can only be swayed by action, assuring that the younger ones are outpacing the vice president. However, unexpectedly, Chiang calls for Ingyu. He mentions he heard he's involved in the Jiangsu redevelopment case, asking if he can anticipate positive outcomes by the meeting. Anxious, the director merely agrees, assuring him completely. But the man begins to laugh, telling him not to be so stiff and questioning why he seems so anxious. In a frightening tone, the man instructs his coworker to give his best effort so they can prevent any future antagonism. While pressing his hand over his latest injury, Ingyu reassures that he doesn't wish for things to escalate that way. Later, he approaches his vehicle. He settles into the rear seat, clearly in considerable agony. He recalls the protagonist's remarks as he stabbed him with his dagger. The man curses him, asserting he'll annihilate him next time. His chauffeur asks if he should drive him home. The director kicks the seat, questioning if that type of question is even warranted. As Dingyu secures everything that can be locked, Taya appears in the passenger seat, inquiring if the man has committed any offense. Clearly, the man is astonished that he got in there. Drawing out his knife, the protagonist remarks that apparently that leg lacks much education, swiftly stabbing it into the man's knee. That causes the director to scream in desperation. Following that, the psychopath calmly exits and says he'll return tomorrow. Terrified, Yu asks who he is and why he keeps doing this, stating that he won't achieve his goals if the man doesn't speak. Night falls. Taya mentions it's already the 7th day, and although he's been stabbing him in non-fatal areas, the director must surely be nearing his limit. He tells Suri that even if they surrender him, her group will never be the same again. They inquire what the protagonist was considering going after the director, stating it was extremely difficult to drive them out. One of them asks their boss for permission to eliminate him, asserting that if they don't surrender him, another war will erupt. Sergei questions why he did that and why he came there to inform them, but Tager simply states there's error 307. He explains that this error prevents individuals from fully utilizing online banking, an issue typically faced by journalists. Furthermore, the internet speed there is below 10K, as if everyone is grinding their teeth in anticipation of being hacked. He questions her why that is. However, the two guards assert that he doesn't comprehend anything, stating he's merely an outsider. Even knowing that everything is due to Chi and Gu, she still stands firm for their families. He states that if all she desires is to safeguard her family, they should have stayed out of the way, questioning why they didn't resist. However, Shuri merely lowers her head, uncertain of what to say. Departing, Taiga mentions that the director will attempt to handle it himself since he can't burden the council, and instructs them to be prepared. Horyang asks what the boy gains from all of this. He claims he'll achieve the title of director within Cheonggu later, in the same house where Ingyu once released a lion to devour his subordinate. The man remarks that it's a tragedy for both of them. The CEO of the mercenary company Peak states he never envisioned the powerful director would endure such humiliation from an outsider. But Ingyu tells the man to be quiet, asserting he's not enduring it because he enjoys it. While smoking, he curses the protagonist, stating that if it weren't for the council meeting, this would have already been settled. In sick ass, he wonders why he doesn't just bring that up, but the man adamantly denies that possibility. He guarantees that they symbolically refer to that meeting as such, claiming it can entirely reorganize Cheonggu. He says he's always maintained a friendship with Chiang, and that once he's finally appointed, he'll have a kind of guy by his side. He advises him that it's best he gives it his all too, since if the project fails, the guy will also be punished for being associated with him. With that, In Six states that Psycho managed to handle his men, so he did a background check on his own. He asks if Inge has heard of the Salernos from Italy. The man admits he has no clue, asking if it's some sort of mafia. The CEO affirms, claiming they're insane. He states the boy is one of them, going by the name Vendetta, their top executioner. The only detail known is that he's Asian. He mentions that since he's a senior director at Chingu, he must possess a considerable amount of money. Insik then inquires about how much he will require. He states that if a nuclear bomb were to surface, they would need to develop one of their own, declaring that someone capable of competing with him has been called to Korea. He mentions that Jerome is a guy who has encountered this vendetta twice and survived to recount the experience. However, the director argues that he should have found someone the protagonist comprehends, not merely someone who managed to endure. Nonetheless, the guy explains that the boy is notorious for pursuing a traitor to the ends of the earth. He recounts a tale of how once Vendetta ventured into the Amazon jungle to track down a traitor surviving solely on insects. Ingu questions whether that just indicates Jerome is good at fleeing, but Insik counters that if that were the case, he wouldn't have arrived so quickly. The CEO declares that the fee is $700,000 in advance, $300,000 afterward, and an additional $300,000 for brokerage. He asserts it was very challenging for him and his team to bring that guy in. The man asks how many men Insik currently has. He insists that if he wants his company involved, the payment will have to be increased. The director makes a call, instructing them to deliver 200 kilograms of cash to the first floor of the basement. With that, the elevator doors open. Something inside shines in the light. He asks the CEO if it truly makes sense to spend $300,000 to eliminate one man. Ingyo mentions that there are 200 kilograms of 50,001 notes there, each weighing approximately 0.97 grams, asserting the guy can do the calculations. He assures it's more than sufficient to retire on, stating they need to have a fruitful conversation. Someone was looking over a blueprint from somewhere. Gray mentions that it's the blueprint of the director's property and that he contacted a security firm and acquired the poster. Tae asks how he managed to purchase it. The boy replies that aside from Jinju's own insurer, all the others are traded for money. After all, Jingu is always ready to replace anyone who fails to generate profit. In other words, their employees lack loyalty. Hearing this, the protagonist states his grandfather would rise from the grave if he heard such a thing. The boy clarifies that most of Ingu's schedule is sent from headquarters, making it risky. The prime time is 10 p.m. However, they realize they lack the blueprint for the first basement floor. Gray asserts he doubts it exists since there are stairs and elevators, but speculates that the blueprint might be with the director himself. He notices that the term B1 crook appears multiple times, and based on his studies, that's a kind of cement utilized in construction. Since it's highly resistant to moisture, chemicals, and weather, it's used for soundproof walls and even in zoos. Hearing this, the protagonist ponders for a moment. Taya requests the boy to do him a favor. Gray replies that he's listening. Vendetta leans close to the boy and whispers something in his ear. He asks why this is coming up all of a sudden, but the protagonist simply states he assumes he'll encounter it. Gray mentions he has that at home, but never thought the guy was the sort to utilize those things. However, Taiga asserts there's no specific type for that kind of thing, and asks the kid to monitor the CCTV for any intruders. Afterward, he calmly exits the restaurant. Someone inquires if he's going out again. Horyong asks if the lunatic plans to provoke the director once more. The protagonist remarks it's difficult to believe someone being stabbed every 24 hours would regard that as merely provocation. He states he's been around since the revolution of the 90s, so he knows how to identify genuine talent. Nevertheless, he'd never heard of him before and asks who the kid is. Taha questions if it would alter anything if the man was aware of his identity. The large fellow appears somewhat annoyed by this. He cautions that if he declines to clarify, he will be viewed as a danger to the boss and will need to be dealt with right then. The protagonist merely glares apathetically, stating that the man recognizes his opponent's abilities and still wishes to compete honestly instead of plotting for an upper hand, asserting that he apparently used to belong to the Ojam gang. As he departs, Vandanus remarks that he trusts his abilities too, which is why he's leaving the place under his supervision while he's away. He assures him that he'll personally reimburse him if any redevelopment occurs, promising 10 times the initial amount proposed as night descends. The director's estate is as silent as ever. The protagonist had successfully bypassed the entrance security. With caution, the assassin slowly opens the door, using his knife to prop it open. He then starts strolling through the rooms in search of his target. Noticing how quiet it is and with all the lights off, Taehout presumes the dear director hasn't returned yet. But he spots the stairs that Gray thought led to the first basement floor, musing if that's the entrance. Thus, the Luminix simply begins to descend the staircase, pausing before a glass window that reveals a lion's habitat. Suddenly, the door crashes shut. Ingu speaks through a speaker, stating it's to see him again. Obviously, Vendetta realizes this is a trap. The director says he suspected from the outset that he'd obtained his schedule after all. The kid always knew when to make a move, referring to the assassins as a repulsive insect. With that, the lion's cage unfastens. The man claims it doesn't matter how adept the protagonist is with knives. He'll never stand a chance against two lions. Naturally, the felines begin to roar, displaying their predatory instincts. Semyu states he couldn't accomplish anything in the 3rd District due to the Ojong gang, but now he has the ideal excuse. Announcing that as he is devoured alive, the place will collapse as armed assassins infiltrate. He assures that tonight, the boy and all the filth of the 3rd neighborhood will be eradicated. Calling the lions by name, the director commands them to attack. With that, the lions start to approach him, swiftly charging towards their prey. Naturally, Yoon, the protagonist, feels fear in such a moment. However, he pulls out the flamethrower and still criticizes their names, noting both are males, taking them down with bullets. Witnessing this, Inju is at a loss for what to do since his entire plan has unraveled. The director questions if that was a firearm, pondering why the maniac isn't using his knives. However, Taiha states daggers are meant for humans and asks if the guy believes he's in a comic book to think someone would do that. Speaking on the phone, he reaches out to Gray, realizing he still has a signal. Cutting the splint off his arm, he alerts that an attack is imminent, asking the boy to inform Suri to prepare. With that, Inyu begins to tremble in fear and anxiety. Recalling a tale of how he entered the Amazon solely to hunt down a critter, surviving for a month by only eating insects. He locks up tighter as he observes the calmness with which the protagonist speaks on the phone. Vendetta terrifyingly gazes into the camera and asserts that while Gray fulfills his role, he'll track down the director. The boy informs everyone that she and Boo are on their way there, particularly warning about the Peak Company, confirming that the message concludes with Taiha asking them to await his return, and that he is going to find Ingyu. Furthermore, since that confrontation is unavoidable, the best course is to confront them directly. If they don't do that, it will be the end for everyone. The Yembari gang members are enraged, asserting that the con artist must have fled after causing all that chaos. Gray attempts to defend his friend, assuring them that he will come back, but the group tells him to be quiet. They claim the kid doesn't even understand how the last war unfolded, mentioning that children his age perished, leaving their parents mourning even now. Stopping the boy, Young Seok also reassures everyone that Taeho will come back. Some question what that man means to her, but another individual proclaims that it's enough. Assistant Soo-hyun instructs everyone to be quiet, stating that this is not a decision for them to make. He asks his superior what they ought to do. The girl clearly was also annoyed and anxious. Suri mentions she didn't witness the last conflict, as when she returned, it was already finished. Confounding them, the girl expresses that she feared losing her father, and because of that, she became Che and Bu's marionette. Apologizing for misleading them, she insists that now is the moment to conclude everything. This is why all the members of the Yabiri gang need to unite and expel Chimhu for good. Sick informs that the director's strategy is to eliminate everyone residing in the 3rd district. Since no property owner possesses rights to substantial apartments, the construction firm can achieve larger profits by marketing luxury units. Although the truce with Ojong stops them from assaulting, with the emergence of the intruder Vendetta and the assassin pursuing him, the situation shifts. His men declare that evidently the assassin is merely a distraction. The bald man confirms this, stating that this unscrupulous Qiangu excels at his role, cautioning that it's crucial for them to refrain from the conflict until the Ojong gang arrives, since Vendetta and that individual will take charge. Jerome had been observing everything casually, admitting that he originally anticipated nothing, but now, this is truly starting to intrigue him again. He remarks that he can sense the conflict, mentioning that Korea appears to be a very fascinating country. The CEO of the company instructs them to activate the drones. Consequently, a van is displayed in an alley, another in a parking area encircled by combat drones. All of them had explosives affixed to their bodies. And Six states that unlike the previous war, they won't need to limit themselves to small arms anymore. He laughs, asserting they are hired gun. As long as there's cash, there are no regulations, guaranteeing they'll triumph in every skirmish. While a car races down a highway, Yu asks the CEO if his men are vigilant, urgently requesting him to confirm this accurately. The guy tells him to calm down, reassuring him that the director should be more safeguarded than the president since 70% of his men are alert. He begins kicking the back of his driver's seat, telling the bald guy to comment after being stabbed in a public sauna, instructing them to merely monitor the area, claiming that the maniac threatened to track him down. The protagonist was inside a vehicle, and Ingyu observes, stating that Vendetta is approaching. Taya thinks to himself that putting trackers in all of the director's cars was definitely worthwhile. Moreover, he's anxious about how Gray and the others will manage things in the district, asserting he needs to wrap this up soon. In one of the security vehicles, a guard alerts the driver that the assassin is right behind them. The guy wonders how the madman knew they were there. While readying to shoot, the soldier questions how fearless this Vendetta guy truly is. With that, he sprays the windshield with gunfire, aiming at the driver. Somehow, the protagonist manages to endure without being hit. However, his car appears to lose control. The security guard warns the others that the black sedan behind them is the target. A bus aligns with Tai's vehicle. He's astonished to see that while they instruct everyone to remain alert, several soldiers prepare their rifles through the window, stating they won't allow him a moment to regain his breath. However, the protagonist swiftly slams the brakes and hurls himself into the barrier. He shatters one of the doors while simultaneously leaping out of the vehicle, using it as a sort of skateboard on the asphalt. Clearly, his car flips ahead. He glances back, startled, trying to determine his next step. After all, besides the numerous vehicles, 2 motorcycles with armed soldiers are nearing. Thus, he uses the door to knock one of them down, jumping and landing a knee to shatter the other guard's helmet, quickly dispatching both of them. He appropriates one of the motorcycles for himself, accelerating as swiftly as possible to catch up with the director. For some reason, one of the escort vehicles was a truck with a car ramp. One of the guards states they have visual contact with him, ordering his comrades to open fire. The Neo from the Matrix evades all the bullets, slipping into their blind spot and heading towards the ramp, realizing it's time to engage in some GTA, accelerating even further to build speed and leaping over the truck. Still airborne, he braces for another daring maneuver, nimbly jumping from the motorcycle onto another vehicle, landing atop one of the security cars. Cautiously, he rises and gets to his feet, inhaling deeply and preparing himself. Grasping his 2 daggers, he declares that the fun starts now. Since they couldn't risk harming their own teammates, the guards merely observe the protagonist, realizing he doesn't even possess a weapon. The crazed individuals decide to accelerate, stating that once he gets alongside the vehicle, they'll crush him. Naturally, Taiha can hear the engine revving louder. He raises his head while listening intently, waiting for the perfect moment. So Vendetta simply makes a slight jump to cease depending on the car for support. As a result, he heads directly toward the bus. The protagonist swiftly prepares to enter through the windshield, taking advantage of the guard's momentary confusion. With that, he shatters the glass and enters the vehicle. The soldiers clearly weren't anticipating anything like that, thus they hardly respond. Seizing the moment, Vendetta quickly slashes them down lethally, moving through them like a savage hurricane, literally severing all of his enemies' heads. Then he shatters the windows, separating the driver, and takes a seat beside him. Clearly, the man is at a loss for what to do in that predicament. He could barely comprehend how a biker who was just soaring moments ago could now be present. Handing over some cash, Tada apologizes and requests the man to drive a bit faster, assuring him it won't take long. In the district, it's reported that drones have been confirmed within a 600-meter range, stating that 16 have been spotted. Gray reports that they split up to attack from a lower altitude. Also, judging by their speed, they appear to be FPVs. Soo-hyun states it's precisely what they anticipated. A few hours earlier, Shuri had inquired with the Major how the last war was conducted. The man explains that Xiang and Ojong only battled during set times. She remarks that it's ironic since they're not in medieval Europe. Still, she asks why the conflict was confined to the district. After all, whenever one side departed, the other did as well. The Major clarifies that only small arms were utilized and only Piak made use of them since both gangs didn't want to attract attention. After all, if a beast like that emerged again, no one would survive to see the next day. With that, the girl becomes reflective for a moment. Soo-hyun states that's why Pete attempted to resolve matters before it reached Ozon's radar, but seizing control of the district would take too long. The boy finally grasps the reason behind the drones. The assistant mentions they are probably outfitted with RPGs or Grisraid self-destruction, warning that they must be ready. The drones start to fly over the area. Some soldiers spot them and prepare to fire with anti-drone weapons to bring them down. With that, some of them begin to hover in place. One soldier cheers for the hit. Another fires his rifle while cursing the mercenaries. The bald man is informed that they lost control of drones on 1st and 7th Streets, assuming the enemy might possess anti-drone capabilities, and Seek questions why they're making that assumption. His subordinate states that signals were lost only in specific areas. Naturally, the CEO becomes furious, asking if Yapari has... Furthermore, anti-drones aren't something commonly encountered. Laughing, he assures that won't be sufficient to stop them. Suddenly, Gray is extremely surprised. They try to comprehend what's happening with the drones, reporting that there are numerous, estimating at least 100. And Sick asks if they truly believed his company would initiate a conflict with merely 10 to 20 drones. The anti-drones only obstruct a limited area, and if you direct them elsewhere, the signal returns. Now with hundreds of drones dispersed in the sky, the man wonders how many they can manage to neutralize. With the previous conflict resulting in renovations throughout most of the district's structures, a simple command allows drones to be deployed anywhere. The CEO expresses his eagerness to find out how many will endure with 800 explosive drones behind them. Someone on the communication device reports that drones are penetrating through the ventilation, cautioning that they appear to be familiar with the building's layout. Soo Vian instructs everyone to evacuate, stating that those have already been programmed, so there's no way to halt them. Grinning, a major reassures that the boss is already on the way. Someone shouts to the bald man, mentioning there's something unusual in the sky. Sick looks up, perplexed. The sky seemed as normal as ever, but abruptly, multiple lights emerge. They intensify increasingly, then several explosions begin to erupt. Perched atop one of the buildings in front of the drones was Shuri, attempting to attract the attention of as many as she could, swiftly manipulating her threads, completely ensnaring them, causing them to halt. Then she leaps away while triggering them to self-destruct. Sick is taken aback, asking who that is, assuring that nothing like that ever occurred during the last conflict. Some time ago, her subordinates were inquiring what that was. She apologizes for not informing them earlier, asserting that this is her genuine weapon. The girl remarks that maybe they're astonished, but as she mentioned, she was elsewhere during the last conflict, stating she was in another location learning how to wield that weapon to aid her father. But fate caused her to arrive too late. That's why she aims to make amends this time, asserting they will ensure those scoundrels never invade their neighborhood again. Suvian is proud, asking Gisov to see how much his daughter has matured. The bald man commands another wave to be dispatched, instructing them to overwhelm them with numbers, commanding to eliminate everyone in their path. But when his soldier attempts to reply, something seems to astonish him. Suddenly, someone strikes the van behind him. Someone informs Oryong that this must be some sort of drone command center. The big guy confirms they were correct. With that, the CDO becomes anxious upon seeing him. The tank moves towards the bald man, declaring that it'll deal with that guy first. 10 years ago, the guy asked if his friend genuinely wanted to create a gang. He said times were shifting, and instead of paying a gang for protection, it was more convenient to establish their own. The major insisted he was still a soldier, and besides, no one there could fight like Gisab. But the guy assured him they weren't coming together to fight anyone up, just to facilitate negotiations. With a grin, he asked his friend what he thought of the name Mayaburi. Back in the present, the mercenaries were pondering how Horyong had discovered that location. The soldiers reported that Alpha Teen had detected a threat. The big guy kept running faster, lowering his head to avoid the gunfire. Frustrated, their captain yelled to stop aiming at the head and shoot at his feet instead. But the tank had already slammed one of them against the wall. His partner couldn't believe what was unfolding. Then the big guy swiftly took down the second mercenary, also slamming him unconscious against the wall. A sniper stated Alpha Team's threat was in his sights. He acknowledged the man was a monster. However, before he could act, his body was entirely sliced apart. As anticipated, it was executed by the girl. She was sprinting swiftly across roof. N6 witnessed it and cursed vehemently. She notified everyone that she had just eliminated another sniper. Subion praised her for the effort and cautioned that there were likely more, advising her to remain vigilant. Moreover, they didn't even know she was there, so the snipers were probably situated in spots with a clear view downward. And the spot where the snipers were gathered was likely the same area where the drones were located. Gray mentioned he had identified a potential site. He stated it was a public parking garage on the opposite side of the community center in a black van. The girl acknowledged she understood and was already on her way there, but something caught her eye. After all, Horyong had just been struck by a bullet, but his nickname wasn't Tank for no reason. The man hadn't received a scratch. As he drew near, he mentioned that in the past 20 years of conflict, he had only survived as a mercenary in that country one way. Insik vowed he would kill the girl after dealing with all of them first. Ripping off his coat, the man exposed his mechanical arm, declaring he would finish the bald man right then and there. Meanwhile, a vehicle crashed onto a viaduct. Fortunately, it didn't flip over when it hit the road below. The director was on his knees before the protagonist, calling him insane, questioning what Vendetta wanted with him and why he was doing all this. However, the man replied he had already stated his plan to stab him once a day, and he plunged the knife into the man's shoulder. And you questioned if Tae-ho was mad for doing something like this over such a trivial reason. The protagonist pulled out his phone saying it would be too much hassle to locate him if he went abroad, so he was bringing him to the district. But the director insisted it was already too late. He assured him that by now there was nothing left on those streets. He proclaimed that he had commanded his men to eliminate everyone, including children and the elderly, instructing them not to make distinctions. He mentioned he had spent more than 100,000 won, asking if the kid had any idea what that signified, stating they were meant to obliterate everything within an hour using explosives, missiles, or whatever they deemed necessary. The protagonist remarked he had heard many individuals perished in the last war just for being caught between the two gangs, asserting that it seemed the guy still didn't grasp why he was only targeting him. He asserted that no one is more lethal than someone who has lost their family. Because individuals like that have nothing left to lose, they risk everything without fear. However, there exists a group of people even stronger than them, those who have a family to protect. Then the director recalled that day in the hospital. Taga said he was certain the man had also seen the gaze of someone willing to do anything to defend their family. With a pain that rends their lungs, a rage that shatters their hearts, all contained in shallow breaths that promise retribution. People like that are powerful, and one of the ones who shaped them that way was none other than the director himself. So the protagonist told him to be quiet and follow him silently. But Inju asked if the kid truly believed Idea's family and revenge were stronger than money. Returning to Horyong's battle, the mercenary admitted he'd never expected the guy was an ex-Ojong, the 16th in command of the gang during the last war. Dodging bullets, the big man said that was in the past. Swinging his axe, instructed his opponent not to underestimate himself, stating everyone knows what that rank signifies. Anyone in the top 20 in Ojong is regarded as one of the most formidable in the nation. Suddenly, Suri's threads emerged mid-fight. The girl swiftly managed to ensnare the bald man entirely. While cursing the girl, the man wondered what kind of thread it was that he couldn't even sever. She called out his name, claiming she heard he was the one who had killed the most in his entire city. Cursing him, Shuri vowed to take his head to alleviate the grief in the hearts of those who remained. With that, Horyong lunged toward him to deliver the final strike. The CEO attempted to plead for them to pause, but fortunately, Jerome appeared and rescued him from there. This clearly took the big guy by surprise. Not much differently, Shuri also didn't grasp what had just transpired. The man stated that because he opted for toys like drones to win, that was the reason the bald guy ended up in that predicament. Grabbing a crowbar, the assassin inquired if he was mistaken. Looking directly at the two, the guy declares that he's going to start. Still perplexed, the girl ponders if the man is a new opponent. Noticing that even though Insik was completely ensnared in his threads, that lunatic pulled him out effortlessly. The leader of the mercenaries questions what the lunatic was doing to arrive so late. However, Jerome simply states that their base is 350 meters to the northwest on the 4th floor of a dilapidated building, instructing the bald guy to head there. Before he can conclude his sentence, Horyong pushes the assassin against the wall. However, the tank appears surprised by something. After all, the guy is laughing while claiming he'll remain there to have a bit of fun. Insik screams over the radio in desperation, commanding them to get all the drones airborne. His subordinate protests, arguing they don't even know where the enemy's command center is. Nevertheless, the leader insists it doesn't matter since his top man is already there. He instructs them to eliminate everyone, while Jerome keeps the guy occupied. Suri approaches the guy, telling him he can't do something like that. This diverts the big guy's attention momentarily, creating an opportunity for the assassin to land a kick and hurl him far away. Clearly, Horyong struggles to regain his balance. Irritated, he acknowledges he didn't anticipate the guy being able to toss 120 kilograms so far, noticing from his stance that it's not even his full strength. The big guy concedes that this man is genuinely promising. The girl calls out to her friend, but he tells his boss not to worry, assuring her that he'll handle matters there. The girl states she'll take care of the drones, asking him to subdue the man and bring him to the base. She commands him to wrap things up there in the next 5 minutes, because if the peaks arrive first, it's over. However, Orion becomes extremely alarmed by something. After all, Jerome appears beside the girl asking if she's already leaving. He requests her to stay a bit longer, claiming it'll be more enjoyable that way. However, the big guy seems ready to hit him, delivering a powerful blow on the assassin, sending him flying. The guy once more asks her to entrust it to him, assuring her that he'll catch up shortly. The girl simply nods. With that, she starts sprinting as fast as she can. Hu Ryong mentally concedes that if she had hesitated, he would have scolded her until she left. He's astonished that she's maintaining her composure even though it's her first battle, stating it must be in her blood. But Jerome begins laughing, asking if this isn't a surprise, acknowledging that if he takes a few more hits like that, he might actually perish. The big guy complains about how he survived a direct strike to the chest, questioning where the guy originated. His opponent says he's from the Philippines, explaining that he learned Korean out of sheer interest, and asks how his pronunciation sounds. They stand face to face gazing at each other. Jerome admits that his life has been dull lately, stating he misses fighting and things like that. He introduces himself and mentions that the two of them will have a lot of fun. With that, the lunatic punches Warion in the face. As anticipated, he retaliates. Preparing another strike, he introduces himself too, unleashing a flurry of attacks all over the enemy's body. While seizing an opportunity and landing an uppercut, the assassin declares that he enjoys this. Naturally, a hit like that leaves Horyong dazed. Before he can recover his senses, the maniac strikes again. Still taking blows, the large individual remembers someone who uncovered his identity, recalling the protagonist, claiming that he believed in his capabilities and would entrust everything to him while he was absent. Clenching his fist, he wonders why that person would have faith in his abilities. Recalling that during the initial district conflict, he led the primary unit of the Ojong gang when it was still new, and that Gisa was the leader of Yabiri, a close companion who collaborated with him for the gang before retiring. Back then, he urged his friend to have confidence in him, promising he would ensure everyone moved into an apartment with a spectacular view. However, Suri's father contends that most people there are elderly, so they can't afford to wait a decade just to return there. He states he'll fight, and if he perishes along the way, at least he'll know he tried to accomplish something. But first he requested a favor, saying that if he dies, he'll leave whatever comes next in his hands. Even severely injured, Orion rises once again, shouting as he attempts to strike his opponent. But Jirong successfully evades and retaliates, while the large man confesses he joined the Ojong gang to discover what it meant to be powerful. However, the reality he encountered only brought him despair, a realm filled with talents that loomed over him like insurmountable mountains. Upon reaching the top 16, the man finally recognized that was the extent of his capabilities. However, the loss of his friend illuminated something he hadn't understood, admitting that what truly made him stronger wasn't the mountains, but the individuals he needed to protect. Jirong continued to land punches on him, but unexpectedly, Hworyong seizes the assassin's head, running while carrying him along with his body, declaring that he's known as the tank for a reason, stating that he's the one who clears the path so others can follow. His adversary appears astonished by the entire turnaround. Smiling, the eccentric claims that his fist is full of conviction, asserting he thought they were just having fun from the beginning. Appearing behind him, the lunatic says that if the man is taking it earnestly, he'll have to do the same. Grabbing a crowbar, Jerome admits that it was enjoyable, saying he'll make him pass on without pain. With that, Hworyong is utterly frozen in shock. A large slash cuts through him horizontally, even slicing the wall in front of him, causing it to start collapsing on top of him. Someone commends the man for all his efforts. Unexpectedly, Taya appears and cuts the wall, preventing it from falling on him. The protagonist Hworyong asks to let him take over from there, thanking him once again for all his hard work. With that, he turns his attention to Jerome. Gazing at him, the assassin remarks that vendetta is very late. The boy says that from this moment on, he will be his adversary. But first, Hworyong asks if his ass can move even with those injuries, clearly covered in deep lacerations. Hworyong insists that it wasn't sufficient, claiming that he's alright, assuring them that they would have to kill him to make him stop moving. So the protagonist tells him to walk 1 block. Staying there will be a black car near a streetlight. Inside the trunk, Ingyu will be waiting for him. He declares that he will handle matters here, asking the man to drive the car to their hideout. Jerome questions if they genuinely believe he'll allow the large man to leave so easily. However, Taeyong throws a manhole cover at his feet. As anticipated, the guy simply blocks it. The protagonist begins walking toward his opponent. Grinning, the lunatic asks if he's serious. Quickly using his crowbar to catch the manhole cover still in the air, skillfully tossing it back, growing increasingly exhilarated. Vendetta rushes toward him as fast as he can, barely managing to avoid it. Both halt at a certain distance from each other. However, Jerome lunges forward, appearing increasingly eager for adrenaline. The protagonist states that evidently, the guy has indeed been wandering around claiming to be his rival. The eccentric asks if that isn't true. With that, they start trading blows at an outrageous speed. However, Tyus states the only thing that guy is a stalker. Yet the assassin continues to laugh, insisting it's all the same. Numerous explosions burst in the sky. Suri is taking out every drone she can. Weary, the girl admits there are far too many drones present. Moreover, she can't afford to spend too much time on this. Suddenly, a voice on the radio indicates that HQ is exchanging fire with the peaks approximately 50 meters from the base. Gray mentions that the situation is perilous, but their position makes it difficult for enemies to approach, telling them not to be concerned. He states that as soon as that man returns, the conflict will be over, so they just need to hold on until then. The girl hearing those words wonders if he might be referring to someone specific. Then she hears the sound of a vehicle. Inside the trunk was the director. Even badly injured, Hu Ryong had gone there to retrieve him. Clearly, the man was increasingly frightened of what fate had in store for him. The large man grabs him by the face like a toy. He contemplates if the way to conclude the war is to crush that worm's skull right then and there. However, if that man loses, Shuri won't be able to confront Jerome alone. So he thinks it may be wiser to seek the Ojong for assistance. With that, he starts squeezing Inghu's face tighter and tighter, muttering to himself that this is the one responsible for everything. And after his demise, Peak and Zhurong will have to retreat. Nevertheless, Taha and his opponent pass by above him, still battling. The assassin was blocking the protagonist's blades. Both begin clashing their weapons again, face to face, glaring at each other once more. They exchanged yet another flurry of strikes. Vendetta manages to land a hit to his adversary's stomach, sending him flying. The guy uses his crowbar as leverage to halt himself. Rising, he admits he was taken aback to discover that his rival was in Korea, but claims he might be beginning to grasp why he came here, demolishing the air conditioner where he'd driven the crowbar's tip. He stuns the protagonist by stating that for assassins like them, that location is a paradise. Attempting to strike him with it, Jerome asks if Vendetta doesn't agree. Clearly, the boy struggles to evade the attack. As a last resort, Taya flings himself backward through an apartment. However, his opponent had already anticipated that, laughing maniacally as he attempts to strike him again. Subian asks if Gray is certain everything will conclude when that man arrives. The boy says he's completely confident, causing the Major to freak out, asking who he is and why they have so much faith in him. Gray questions if the advisor recalls that the news used to refer to the Jinbu family as royalty, informing him that the so-called terrorist was Taiha. However, he asks the man to disregard the words he just heard, asserting that in fact he is not a terrorist who murdered the royal family, because even though he departed, that man is still part of that royal family, declaring that referring to him as the heir to the throne makes much more sense. In his mind, Vendetta reminisces about the first time their paths crossed. They were both in England and had the same target. Suddenly, a massive explosion rattles the tunnel walls. The protagonist and Jerome were clashing. The guy had fallen onto the train tracks. He supports himself with his crowbar. Looking down, he appears startled, realizing that his legs had been entirely shattered. Due to that, he was unable to move and a train was drawing near. The guy even glances up, hoping for some assistance from Taha. However, the boy does nothing, insisting he was certain he had killed him at that moment. But then, after a while, a cargo plane soars through the sky. Two individuals begin to drop from it. The protagonist mentions that once he dealt with a traitor attempting to flee to Russia, that's when they encountered each other again, battling in the air. They commenced exchanging blows while in free fall, until Vendetta succeeds in hitting his vest, severing the parachute trigger, placing his foot on his chest and shoving him downwards. Yet he didn't perish that time either. On the contrary, Jerome appears to become stronger with each conflict. The maniac keeps laughing, asserting that the protagonist's blow wasn't sufficient, claiming it boiled down to a very slight distinction, noting that his right-hand strikes are weaker than those of his left. With that, Jerome swiftly charges at Taha, declaring that Vendetta failed to eliminate him despite numerous chances, including the last hit. The guy delivers a fiercely potent blow. The protagonist realizes that his right arm starts to quiver after the strike, as it was the one that had been shattered during his vengeance. Taking advantage of that brief distraction, the madman appears behind him, questioning whether someone of his caliber truly injured his arm. The boy manages to evade the blow, while his adversary states that after his brief experience in that nation, he can even comprehend him. Jerome insists it would be insane to think that place isn't filled with exceptional fighters after they created a lawless environment by assassinating the president. He asserts that even so, the best among them all remains Vendetta, since he is the only one to push him to the edge of death and strengthen him each time. The guy begins slicing the water tank with the tip of his crowbar, tearing a significant gash into its structure, flinging that piece at his opponent. Taya doesn't have time to respond. The assassin leaps, preparing for the final blow while exploiting his enemy's weakness. Landing a remarkably forceful strike, kicking up a cloud of dust, he lands smoothly on the ground. But to his astonishment, the protagonist wasn't present, wondering how the boy managed to evade that. He starts to shake with fury, claiming he clearly saw him being struck, realizing that he can disappear from sight effortlessly. He blocks one of the daggers thrown by his opponent. Jerome proclaims that Vendetta has failed once more and missed another opportunity. However, the protagonist interrupts him, assuring that this time he'll ensure it's finished. As the blade finally strikes the ground, Taya was already positioned directly in front of his adversary. The guy couldn't grasp what had just occurred, asking if his rival had always been this swift. The assassin Vendetta delivers a slash that cleaves everything around him in two. Taya says he's just like him, stating that he too has been through death, finishing his rival right then and there. Meanwhile, Shuri was urgently sprinting across rooftops. She states that according to the radio, this is the final batch of drones, mentioning she needs to take them out as swiftly as possible and return to base. The girl is perplexed upon noticing two men carrying a body. One of them spots her presence. Frozen, she wonders if they are more foes. However, the guy calls her by name, claiming to be from a special forces unit of the Ojong gang. While saying they are acting under Captain Hunman's orders, the man himself appears before the protagonist. He promptly warns that he has received orders to kill him, asking Taha what he should do. The two gaze at each other after that peculiar question. The protagonist recalls him, also pondering how he knew his whereabouts, realizing that he's likely not one of Inju's men. Besides, if he wanted to eliminate him, the guy would have ambushed him instead of revealing himself. The boy claims he believed he was unique, indicating that he is evidently affiliated with Ojong. Huaimon inquires if he expects some kind of gratitude, asserting that he should realize they cannot permit disorder there. Taga suggests the man likely didn't grasp the entire narrative, but he assures him that he wasn't the one who initiated the conflict. Just as the two are on the verge of starting a detailed argument, the madman begins to rise like a zombie behind him. This clearly leaves both of them utterly speechless. Struggling to speak, Jerome acknowledges that was rather serious. Naturally, Vendetta retrieves his other dagger that was lying on the ground. However, the corpse manages to evade him. The lunatic pulls out a grenade from his pocket. He hurls it, declaring he'll see his friend another time. The other two are caught off guard by the flashbang. The protagonist scans the vicinity with his eye, attempting to find him. He begins to move, eager to pursue the zombie. However, Huiman halts the boy, instructing him to wait a moment, stating that Teo should uphold order. It's clear that Vendetta is annoyed by this. Wielding his dagger, the protagonist asserts that the zombie was first in line. However, his opponent effortlessly blocks the strike. He realizes that this individual anticipated his action. Huiman concedes that he can't perceive him at that ludicrous speed. Still, it would be embarrassing to be tricked by the same ploy twice. The Kalkin states that from the way it appears, the boy isn't in a fighting state, questioning why he doesn't attempt to be nice just this once. He admits the man always seems formidable to him, but suggests he is someone promising who hasn't tapped into his full capabilities yet. That implies Huiman is someone capable of advancing things within the gang. Both create distance from each other. The protagonist states he had already noticed, but given his abilities, his opponent doesn't appear to have blood on his hands. He asks if he's correct in assuming Huiman has never taken a life before. The man tries to strike, but Tager vanishes. Li Yun, the man surprised, finds the protagonist already positioned behind him, grinning as he observes him. Yet, to the boy's astonishment, the captain also accelerates, stating that he's already defeated many until they were left in pools of blood. Witnessing that, Vendetta is taken aback by the brutality. Even so, he avoids the strike, instructing the guy to go to the third floor of the abandoned building 450 meters northwest, claiming that's where the resident's hideout is, stating that even if Quomint can't eliminate him, he'll gain something worthwhile. But when he turns around, the man realizes no one is there anymore, left alone in the midst of that alley. Snorting in frustration, he declares he's tired of that brat. The third district was utterly silent. The Aozhong gang's special force communicates over the radio, commanding everyone to pay heed, instructing them to surrender. If they refuse, his squad will annihilate each of them. The announcement is reiterated once again as Insik conceals himself to avoid being shot. He curses as he observes his soldiers lifeless on the stairs. The man complains, questioning whether the Ojong gang also placed spies there, just like they did. Greg remained concealed in another room, asking if the major was all right and pleading with him not to pass out. Even struggling to breathe, Suyan asks the boy to speak softly, indicating they can't allow their locations to be exposed. Over the radio, it's reported that they discovered 2 individuals in the hideout. However, numerous soldiers were present in the surrounding buildings, making the vicinity perilous. His subordinate asks why they don't retreat, assuring him they'll face difficulties with Ojong there. But Insik tells him to be quiet. Clearly, the mercenary leader could only focus on the cash, stating that chances like this arise only once in a lifetime. The major addresses the bald man, suggesting he truly intends to pursue this to the end. The man asserts that if they succeed in eliminating Giziab, Jerome will take care of everything else, but only if they finalize matters here. He continues by declaring that he will take the life of the Yaburu leader himself. But someone silently approaches him. Paralyzing him with dread, the individual covers his mouth. It was Quarian, asking if he really just announced that their lives were valued at 10,000 milzen won. Spinning around quickly, the bald man states that the fellow must be nothing more than a walking corpse by this point. However, the large man steps back, saying he will ensure he spills every drop of blood, vowing it's for all those he has slain, landing a punch square in his chest, causing the mercenary leader to expel a massive quantity of blood. The impact of the strike is so powerful it propels him out of the building. The mercenaries in the adjacent building are startled by this, but before they can react, some wires appear. Consequently, they begin to get choked. As she jumps, Cherie effortlessly beheads them. Meanwhile, Insik has perished from the fall. While fleeing, the girl realizes that everything is finally finished. After that, 5 minutes go by. Human has finally reached the building the protagonist mentioned. Upon entering one of the rooms, the guy queries what that is. At a makeshift table, Tay invites the man to join them. The boy notes that seated at that table are the representative from the 3rd District, a delegate from the Jianggu, Ingyu, and lastly a spokesperson for the Ojong gang, suggesting that evidently all the essential parties are present. The protagonist declares that they are now officially going to negotiate the redevelopment rights of the district, asserting that everyone should leave satisfied. Still in the Yabiri base building, someone informs their superior that they aren't sure how to convey this, stating that they weren't deceived. They express that they feel unqualified to speak there and ask if the sir could assist. As someone approaches, the guy tells the old man not to complain so much. He takes a deep breath after hanging up the phone and picks up his cigarette. With that, Taha offers his lighter, commenting that it must be tough working until that hour. Huiman remarks that it seems the kid has started bringing his own cigarettes. The protagonist inquires if the guy still hasn't moved on, wondering if one in exchange, but he simply declines. The captain admits he lacked confidence in his victory during the last confrontation, saying that will be true for many of his upcoming battles. However, he states that if he gets the opportunity to fight 3 more times, he guarantees he'll triumph. The boy merely observes him in silence. Frustrating the guy, Vendetta remarks that it's unfortunate he only has 1 life. With that, one of them finishes smoking his cigarette. As the protagonist walks away, Wu Min asks how he can still be alive and well after confronting Jiansu. He states he won't reveal anything right then, affirming that, like it or not, the guy will know everything the next time they encounter each other. The captain smiles, saying the brat never provides straightforward answers, expressing curiosity to see if Taiyao will behave that way with the man who is about to arrive. After some time back at the abandoned building, Huiman returns with 2 additional men, including Jae-poo. As they enter, Ho-ryong promptly bows to greet them, introducing himself as the former leader of Group B from the ancient branch, apologizing for making the vice president come all the way there. The older man mentions it's been a while since he last saw him, observing that the man has some injuries. However, the man responds that fortunately he isn't having trouble moving. Jae-poo remarks that evidently he is the one with the issue here, asking him to cease the formalities. After all, Hworyang isn't part of the gang anymore, telling him not to bow so easily to others, stating he didn't allow him to leave so peacefully just to be greeted that way. Even Huiman perceives the unusual tension. The large man admits it's already surprising to see the 7th, but he never anticipated the 2nd in command to appear there. He was the one who transformed the gang into an organization integrated into the political system. When he was appointed vice president, it created quite a commotion. Acknowledging that the man consistently led them to triumph, where aggression isn't an option, he figures that's even more problematic than Xionggu. Everyone falls silent as they hear his footsteps nearing. Japol introduces himself and states that before they commence, there are some issues he would like to discuss. Ingu was still bound, muttering incessantly. The man insists that they free the director, stating he refuses to negotiate anything until then. Unlike Shuri, who is enraged, the protagonist merely states that man is a criminal who broke the agreement. Taihao was about to say something more, but the elder commands him to be quiet. He asserts the boy is an outsider who shouldn't even be present, warning that one more word and he'll walk away. Thus, the boy has no option but to stay silent. The man reiterates his demand for them to release the director, while Hunman appears satisfied with his superior's position. Since he couldn't speak, the boy simply nods to the girl. She complies with her request. Jaipal mentions there's a vehicle waiting for him outside, instructing the guy to go first. Inju starts to depart, assuring them he will repay his debt, telling everyone to hold on, vowing he'll ensure their deaths are as painless as possible. Suri obviously was furious about the whole situation. The girl questions what the old man's issue is, noting he was about to be betrayed by the manager and yet still acted this way. However, Jaipal asks how the woman expects him to trust everything they said. That leaves her even more bewildered and furious, asking how could she possibly determine whether it was genuinely a breach of contract or merely some internal conflict between the two. She bangs the table, declaring that the director held her father hostage, the man who was killed by their 3rd best subordinate. Looking at the protagonist, the man questions if it wasn't him who stabbed Ingyu at the hospital. That of course leaves her speechless. He asserts that even if the director was threatening her people, it still wouldn't justify a war. So after they provoked and threatened that man with an outsider, it's his responsibility to hold both sides accountable for breaking the contract. Following that, Japal asks if they possess any solid evidence to dispute him. Clearly, the protagonist was eager to kill him. On the other hand, Cherries states that in that case, they're no longer interested in bargaining with the Ojim gang. The man states that decision is no longer in the girls' control since they accepted the terms of the agreement but violated them. The representative announces that within 24 hours they will send a proposal, informing them that they'll have another 24 hours to reply. With that, the 3 of them depart normally. Suri kicks the table, extremely annoyed. Shaking, the girl says she couldn't even express everything she wanted to, insisting that Jae-pol never intended to negotiate from the beginning. Taeyin simply concurs with her. She also suspects that there's a spy among them since the old man already knew everything before even arriving there. The girl looks at the protagonist, asking if at least everything is progressing according to plan. He responds affirmatively, complimenting her efforts. Meanwhile, the members of Ojong head towards the vehicle. Surprisingly, the older man states that Human should go separately, insisting he doesn't provide careers to cowards who flee at the first sign of defeat. But evidently, the captain dislikes that, asserting he explained precisely what was occurring, declaring that he's still young and inquiring what was expected of him. However, Jaipal disregards this and continues on his path, yet someone intercepts their vehicle. As anticipated, it was the protagonist. The car slowly approaches him. Cracking the window open slightly, Jaipal asks what he desires. The boy states that since both gangs are now part of a larger power structure, it's crucial they don't cross certain boundaries. Thus, if they lose the director who was just freed, and given that Chuyanggu recently lost its president, they will become more susceptible, undermining the agreement between them, especially if the individual and reason behind the disappearance remain unclear. He states that for someone who claimed he didn't meet to negotiate with a stranger, he now has compelling reasons to at least have a discussion. At that point, Jeppel remembers what was mentioned in the meeting. Recalling Horyang, the man understands that he wasn't waiting for him, but was anticipating the director's release. The elderly man acknowledges that he expected the boy to pursue him. But now that he recognizes the kid isn't as naive as he presumed, he feels uncertain about what to think next. The elderly man completely shifts his attitude, stating there's a seat free and inquires if the boy would like to accompany him. However, the protagonist insists they aren't that acquainted, claiming they just need to resolve things straightforwardly. Jeppel assures him that he wouldn't set a snare this late in the scenario, claiming he simply knows a fantastic cigar lounge. Taha remarks that only complicates matters since he is exceptionally selective about his cigars. The man mentions he heard that he was away from Korea for a time and asks where the protagonist has been residing. The boy replies he was in Italy. The elderly man states that although he isn't very familiar with them, the place he's referring to also offers cigars, trying to recall the name. Before the man can finish his sentence, the guy enters the car, saying he should have noted that from the beginning. Jeppel is slightly taken aback by the assassin's response. He observes that Seoul's speed limit is 31 miles per hour, but Taya tells him not to be concerned and just to hurry. After that, they arrive at the location. A white-haired man approaches them. He mentions these are the cigars the gentleman usually enjoys. Additionally, he brought the ones he had ordered. The man states he'll savor them as always. The waiter wishes them a pleasant time. However, before he departs, Teika calls him back, asking if they have matches. The waiter responds affirmatively and asks if he should bring them. It was a high-end establishment with exceedingly pricey drinks. The boy remarks that isn't a typical cigar made with a Kentucky blend, appreciated by workers in various social classes, noted for its considerable length, which is sometimes cut in half to be shared with companions. Handing a piece to Jaipur, he explains that's why it was termed the friendship cigar. Slightly surprised, the man accepts it, saying it takes roughly half an hour to an hour to smoke a full cigar, realizing Taha only desires a 15-minute conversation. With that, both remain quiet for a moment. The elderly man concedes that the cigar isn't bad. He also admits that he doesn't care what transpires in the 3rd District, as topics like that don't pique his interest. That's why he reveals the actual reason he came there. First, Huiman still doesn't know how to manage situations like that. Second, he couldn't grasp how someone capable of confronting Chimbu's royalty ended up in a situation like this. The protagonist states he nearly perished back then, asserting he's only alive because of the individuals from there. He requests that the man provide guaranteed housing to the citizens until the redevelopment plans are finalized, offering the necessary relocation assistance for a new apartment by Gangnam standards with no additional costs. Jeppel mentions that just the construction alone will amount to 3,000 mills and won. If they provide that kind of assistance, families would gain 10 times the property's worth. Taya asks if they're not there to negotiate, as he got the impression the man wanted to inquire about his plans for Jinwoo's future. However, the elderly man denies that intention, saying he's present for a different reason. His genuine interest lies in the protagonist's awareness of the committee. The largest conglomerate in South Korea, controlling advanced industries and entertainment sectors nationwide, Kyunggu Corporation, the criminal organization behind the president's assassination, ranking members by capability. Aojang, the pseudo-religious group with the largest chamber, composed of all post-assassination presidents, the Eternal Life Sect. The largest criminal organization consisting of military elites and media moguls was dismissed by Ashong, the Dobang Association, and ultimately the committee's founder, the Yan House of Cheongju. Since 1990, these 5 groups have governed the nation through the committee. Their only desire is for equilibrium, perfect equilibrium with power distributed fairly. Upon hearing this, Atahe remains quiet, somewhat contemplative. The protagonist suggests they seem concerned that Chang may disrupt that equilibrium. However, Jaipil reassures him that's not the case, stating the boy already understands the correct response. He inquires if it was Chang who caused his near-death incident. Yet the protagonist appears to pause for a brief moment, recalling when he confronted Jiansu and the instant when the old man declared it all ends here. Nonetheless, the boy insists it was Jiansu. The man suddenly remarks Xionggu has Jiansu, asserting that's what was stated the instant they recognized his power, a man of unknown background, age, and identity who became the president's protector, claiming Xionggu's presidency flourishes due to his brilliance. This man first appeared through a coup, and while he is apprehensive to believe it, it's possible Jiansu is exploiting the organization to pursue his ambitions. Tae questions what the man hopes to achieve by sharing this. Reclining, J-Pill confirms that he must be aware, declaring he's confident the boy knows what he truly desires. The protagonist speculates that perhaps this man wants him to eliminate Chiang and Jiansu. Rising Vendetta thanks him for the cigar, cautioning that he will interpret that as consent on the district issue. The old man states that if someone outside the committee discovers his identity, protocol dictates he must be removed. With that, he implores the protagonist not to attempt escaping, reassuring him that he wishes to preserve the bond they share. The boy halts his steps, urging Jetbo to look ahead and pay attention to the upcoming Cheonggu Council meeting. Elsewhere, a fax is delivered to an office. This was the 31st floor of Cheonggu Electronics. One of the staff members questions who could send a fax there, calmly reading the correspondence that had been dispatched, astonished at its contents. Meanwhile, in a forested area adjacent to a waterfall, someone was sprinting barefoot across the terrain. It was Pyoto, a board member, attempting to conceal himself with the same message clutched in his hands. Contacting the vice president, the man informs him that Ingyu has declared he will not participate in the vote. The old man who is bathing halts in place, visibly annoyed. The man states he sent a fax indicating that a substitute will be attending. The gruff man inquires who the substitute might be. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the tale? I found it quite enjoyable. If you want to catch this segment, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up. See you in the next story, everyone.